The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum, narrated by Sam Kusi. A faithful story of the astonishing adventure undertaken by the Tin Woodman, assisted by Woot the Wanderer, the Scarecrow of Oz, and Polychrome, the Rainbow's daughter. Chapter 1. Woot the Wanderer. The Tin Woodman sat on his glittering tin throne in the handsome tin hall of his splendid tin castle in the Winkie Country of the land of Oz. Beside him, in a chair of woven straw, sat his best friend, the Scarecrow of Oz. At times they spoke to one another of curious things they had seen and strange adventures they had known since first the two had met and become comrades. But at times they were silent, for these things had been talked over many times between them, and they found themselves contented in merely being together, speaking now and then a brief sentence to prove they were wide awake and attentive. But then, these two quaint persons never slept. Why would they sleep when they never tired? And now, as the brilliant sun sank low over the Winkie Country of Oz, tinting the glistening tin towers and tin minarets of the tin castle with glorious sunset hues, there approached along a winding pathway Woot the Wanderer, who met at the castle entrance a Winkie servant. The servants of the Tin Woodman all wore tin helmets and tin breastplates, and uniforms covered with tiny tin discs sewed closely together on silver cloth, so that their bodies sparkled as beautifully as did the tin castle, and almost as beautifully as did the Tin Woodman himself. Woot the Wanderer looked at the manservant, all bright and glittering, and at the magnificent castle, all bright and glittering, and as he looked, his eyes grew big with wonder. For Woot was not very big and not very old, and wanderer though he was, this proved the most gorgeous sight that had ever met his boyish gaze. "Who lives here?" he asked. "The Emperor of the Winkies, who is the famous Tin Woodman of Oz," replied the servant, who had been trained to treat all strangers with courtesy. "A Tin Woodman? How queer!" exclaimed the little wanderer. "Well, perhaps our emperor is queer," admitted the servant, "but he is a kind master, and as honest and true as good tin can make him. So we, who gladly serve him, are apt to forget that he is not like other people." "May I see him?" asked Woot the Wanderer, after a moment's thought. "If it please you to wait a moment, I will go and ask him," said the servant, and then he went into the hall where the Tin Woodman sat with his friend the Scarecrow. Both were glad to learn that a stranger had arrived at the castle, for this would give them something new to talk about, so the servant was asked to admit the boy at once. By the time Woot the Wanderer had passed through the grand corridors, all lined with ornamental tin and under stately tin archways, and through the many tin rooms, all set with beautiful tin furniture, his eyes had grown bigger than ever, and his whole little body thrilled with amazement. But astonished though he was able to make a polite bow before the throne and to say, in a respectful voice, "I salute your illustrious majesty and offer you my humble services." "Very good," answered the Tin Woodman in his accustomed cheerful manner. "Tell me who you are, and whence you come." "I am known as Woot the Wanderer," answered the boy, "and I have come, through many travels and by roundabout ways, from my former home in a far corner of the Gillikin country of Oz." "To wander from one's home," remarked the Scarecrow, "is to encounter dangers and hardships, especially if one is made of meat and bone. Had you no friends in that corner of the Gillikin country? Was it not homelike and comfortable?" To hear a man, stuffed with straw, speak, and speak so well, quite startled Woot, and perhaps he stared a bit rudely at the Scarecrow. But after a moment, he replied, "I had home and friends, your honourable strawness, but they were so quiet and happy and comfortable that I found them dismally stupid. Nothing in that corner of Oz interested me, but I believed that in other parts of the country I would find strange people and see new sights, and so I set out upon my wandering journey. I have been a wanderer for nearly a full year, and now my wanderings have brought me to this splendid castle. I suppose," said the Tin Woodman, "that in this year you have seen so much that you have become very wise." "No," replied Woot thoughtfully, "I'm not wise at all. I beg to assure your Majesty, the more I wander, the less I find that I know, for in the land of Oz, much wisdom and many things may be learned." "To learn is simple. Don't you ask questions?" inquired the Scarecrow. "Yes, I ask as many questions as I dare, but some people refuse to answer questions." "That is not kind of them," declared the Tin Woodman. "If one does not ask for information, he seldom receives it. So I, for my part, make it a rule to answer any civil question that is asked me." "So do I," added the Scarecrow, nodding. "I'm glad to hear this," said the Wanderer, "for it makes me bold to ask for something to eat." "Bless the boy," cried the Emperor of the Winkies. "How careless of me not to remember that wanderers are usually hungry. I will have food brought you at once." Saying this, he blew upon a tin whistle that was suspended from his tin neck, and at the summons, a servant appeared and bowed low. The Tin Woodman ordered food for the stranger, and in a few minutes the servant brought in a tin tray heaped with a choice array of good things to eat, all neatly displayed on tin dishes that were polished till they shone like mirrors. The tray was set upon a tin table drawn before the throne, and the servant placed a tin chair before the table for the boy to seat himself. "Eat, friend wanderer," said the Emperor cordially, "and I trust the feast will be to your liking. I myself do not eat, being made in such a manner that I require no food to keep me alive. Neither does my friend the Scarecrow. But all my Winkie people eat, being formed of flesh, as you are, and so my tin cupboard is never bare, and strangers are always welcome to whatever it contains." The boy ate in silence for a time, being really hungry, but after his appetite was somewhat satisfied, he said, "How happened your Majesty to be made of tin, and still be alive?" "That," replied the Tin Man, "is a long story." "The longer the better," said the boy. "Won't you please tell me the story?" "If you desire it," promised the Tin Woodman, leaning back in his tin throne and crossing his tin legs. "I haven't related my history in a long while, because everyone here knows it nearly as well as I do. But you, being a stranger, are no doubt curious to learn how I became so beautiful and prosperous, so I will recite for you, for your benefit, my strange adventures." "Thank you," said Woot the Wanderer, still eating. "I was not always made of tin," began the Emperor, "for in the beginning I was a man of flesh and bone and blood, and lived in the Munchkin Country of Oz. There I was by trade a woodchopper, and contributed my share to the comfort of the Oz people by chopping up the trees of the forest to make firewood, in which the women would cook their meals, while the children warmed themselves about the fires. For my home I had a little hut by the edge of the forest, and my life was one of much content, until I fell in love with a beautiful Munchkin girl who lived not far away." "What was the Munchkin girl's name?" asked Woot. "Nimmie Amee. This girl, so fair that the sunsets blushed when their rays fell upon her, lived with a powerful witch who wore silver shoes and who had made the poor child her slave. Nimmie Amee was obliged to work from morning till night for the old witch of the East, scrubbing and sweeping her hut, and cooking her meals and washing her dishes. She had to cut firewood too, until I found her one day in the forest and fell in love with her. After that I always brought plenty of firewood to Nimmie Amee, and we became very friendly. Finally, I asked her to marry me, and she agreed to do so, but the witch happened to overhear our conversation, and it made her very angry, for she did not wish her slave to be taken away from her. The witch commanded me never to come near Nimmie Amee again. But I told her I was my own master and would do as I pleased, not realizing that this was a careless way to speak to a witch. The next day, as I was cutting wood in the forest, the cruel witch enchanted my axe, so that it slipped and cut off my right leg. "How dreadful!" cried Woot the Wanderer. "Yes, it was a seeming misfortune," agreed the Tin Man, "for a one-legged woodchopper is of little use in his trade. But I would not allow the witch to conquer me so easily. I knew a very skillful mechanic at the other side of the forest who was my friend, so I hopped on one leg to him and asked him to help me. He soon made me a new leg out of tin and fastened it cleverly to my meat body. It had joints at the knee and at the ankle and was almost as comfortable as the leg I had lost. "Your friend must have been a wonderful workman," exclaimed Woot. "He was indeed," admitted the Emperor. "He was a tinsmith by trade and could make anything out of tin." When I returned to Nimmie Amee, the girl was delighted and threw her arms around my neck and kissed me, declaring she was proud of me. The witch saw the kiss and was more angry than before. When I went to work in the forest next day, my axe, being still enchanted, slipped and cut off my other leg. Again I hopped on my tin leg to my friend the tinsmith, who kindly made me another tin leg and fastened it to my body. So I returned joyfully to Nimmie Amee, who was much pleased with my glittering legs, and promised that when we were wed, she would always keep them oiled and polished. But the witch was more furious than ever, and as soon as I raised my axe to chop, it twisted around and cut off one of my arms. The tinsmith made me a tin arm, and I was not much worried, because Nimmie Amee declared she still loved me. Chapter 2. The Heart of the Tin Woodman. The Emperor of the Winkies paused in his story to reach for an oil can with which he carefully oiled the joints in his tin throat, for his voice had begun to squeak a little. Woot the Wanderer, having satisfied his hunger, watched this oiling process with much curiosity, but begged the Tin Man to go on with his tale. "The witch with the silver shoes hated me for having defied her," resumed the Emperor, his voice now sounding clear as a bell, "and she insisted that Nimmie Amee should never marry me. Therefore she made the enchanted axe cut off my other arm, and the tinsmith also replaced that member with tin, including these finely jointed hands that you see me using. But alas, after that, the axe, still enchanted by the cruel witch, cut my body in two, so that I fell to the ground. Then the witch, who was watching from a nearby bush, rushed up and seized the axe, and chopped my body into several small pieces, after which, thinking that at last she had destroyed me, she ran away, laughing with wicked glee. But Nimmie Amee found me. She picked up my arms and legs and head, and made a bundle of them and carried them to the tinsmith, who set to work and made me a fine body of pure tin. When he had joined the arms and legs to the body and set my head in the tin collar, I was a much better man than ever, for my body could not ache or pain me, and I was so beautiful and bright that I had no need of clothing. Clothing is always a nuisance because it soils and tears and has to be replaced, but my tin body only needs to be oiled and polished. Nimmie Amee still declared she would marry me, as she still loved me in spite of the witch's evil deeds. The girl declared I would make the brightest husband in all the world, which was quite true. However, the wicked witch was not yet defeated. When I returned to my work, the axe slipped and cut off my head, which was the only meat part of me then remaining. Moreover, the old woman grabbed up my severed head and carried it away with her and hid it. But Nimmie Amee came into the forest and found me wandering around helplessly because I could not see where to go, and she led me to my friend, the tinsmith. The faithful fellow at once set to work to make me a tin head, and he had just completed it when Nimmie Amee came running up with my old head, which she had stolen from the witch. But on reflection, I considered the tin head far superior to the meat one. I am wearing it yet, so you can see its beauty and grace of outline. And the girl agreed with me that a man all made of tin was far more perfect than one formed of different materials. The tinsmith was as proud of his workmanship as I was, and for 3 whole days all admired me and praised my beauty. Being now completely formed of tin, I had no more fear of the wicked witch, for she was powerless to injure me. Nimmie Amee said we must be married at once, for then she could come to my cottage and live with me and keep me bright and sparkling. "I'm sure, my dear Nick," said the brave and beautiful girl, my name was then Nick Chopper, "you should be told that you will make the best husband any girl could have. I shall not be obliged to cook for you, for now you do not eat. I shall not have to make your bed, for tin does not tire or require sleep. When we go to a dance, you will not get weary before the music stops and say you want to go home. All day long, while you are chopping wood in the forest, I shall be able to amuse myself in my own way, a privilege few wives enjoy. There is no temper in your new head, so you will not get angry with me. Finally, I shall take pride in being the wife of the only live tin man in all the world." Which shows that Nimmie Amee was as wise as she was brave and beautiful. "I think she was a very nice girl," said Woot the Wanderer, "but tell me, please, why were you not killed when you were chopped to pieces?" "In the land of Oz," replied the Emperor, "no one can ever be killed. A man with a wooden leg or a tin leg is still the same man, and as I lost parts of my meat body by degrees, I always remained the same person as in the beginning, even though, in the end, I was all tin and no meat." "I see," said the boy, thoughtfully. "And did you marry Nimmie Amee?" "No," answered the Tin Woodman, "I did not. She said she still loved me, but I found that I no longer loved her. My tin body contained no heart, and without a heart, no one can love. So the wicked witch conquered in the end, and when I left the Munchkin Country of Oz, the poor girl was still the slave of the witch and had to do her bidding that night." "Where did you go?" asked Woot. "Well, I first started out to find a heart, so I could love Nimmie Amee again. But hearts are more scarce than one would think. One day, in the big forest that was strange to me, my joints suddenly became rusted because I had forgotten to oil them. There I stood, unable to move hand or foot, and there I continued to stand, while days came and went until Dorothy and the Scarecrow came along and rescued me. They oiled my joints and set me free, and I've taken good care never to rust again." "Who was this Dorothy?" questioned the Wanderer. "A little girl who happened to be in the house when it was carried by a cyclone, all the way from Kansas to the land of Oz. When the house fell in the Munchkin Country, it fortunately landed on the Wicked Witch and smashed her flat. It was a big house, and I think the witch is under it yet." "No," said the Scarecrow, correcting him. "Dorothy says the witch turned to dust, and the wind scattered the dust in every direction. Well," continued the Tin Woodman, after meeting the Scarecrow and Dorothy, I went with them to the Emerald City, where the Wizard of Oz gave me a heart. But the wizard's stock of hearts was low, and he gave me a kind heart instead of a loving heart, so that I could not love Nimmie Amee any more than I did when I was heartless. Couldn't the wizard give you a heart that was both kind and loving? Asked the boy. No, that was what I asked for, but he said he was so short on hearts just then that there was but one in stock, and I could take that or none at all. So I accepted it, and I must say that for its kind it's a very good heart indeed. It seems to me, said Woot musingly, that the wizard fooled you. It can't be a very kind heart, you know. Why not? Demanded the Emperor. Because it was unkind of you to desert the girl who loved you, and who had been faithful and true to you when you were in trouble. Had the heart the wizard gave you been a kind heart, you would have gone back home and made the beautiful Munchkin girl your wife, and then brought her here to be an empress and live in your splendid tin castle. The Tin Woodman was so surprised at this frank speech that for a time he did nothing but stare hard at the boy wanderer. But the Scarecrow wagged his stuffed head and said, in a positive tone, "The boy's right. I've often wondered myself why you didn't go back and find that poor Munchkin girl." Then the Tin Woodman stared hard at his friend the Scarecrow, but finally he said in a serious tone of voice, "I must admit that never before have I thought of such a thing as finding Nimmie Amee and making her Empress of the Winkies. But it is surely not too late, even now, to do this, for the girl must still be living in the Munchkin Country. And since this strange wanderer has reminded me of Nimmie Amee, I believe it is my duty to set out and find her. Surely, it is not the girl's fault that I no longer love her, and so, if I can make her happy, it is proper that I should do so. And, in this way, reward her for her faithfulness." "Quite right, my friend," agreed the Scarecrow. "Will you accompany me on this errand?" asked the Tin Emperor. "Of course," said the Scarecrow. "And will you take me along?" pleaded Woot the Wanderer in an eager voice. "To be sure," said the Tin Woodman, "if you care to join our party. It was you who first told me it was my duty to find and marry Nimmie Amee, and I'd like you to know that Nick Chopper, the Tin Emperor of the Winkies, is a man who never shirks his duty once it is pointed out to him." "It ought to be a pleasure as well as a duty, if the girl is so beautiful," said Woot, well pleased with the idea of this adventure. "Beautiful things may be admired, if not loved," asserted the Tin Man. "Flowers are beautiful, for instance, but we are not inclined to marry them. Duty, on the contrary, is a bugle call to action, whether you are inclined to act or not. In this case, I obey the bugle call of duty." "When shall we start?" inquired the Scarecrow, who was always glad to embark upon a new adventure. "I don't hear any bugle, but when do we go?" "As soon as we can get ready," answered the Emperor. "I'll call my servants at once and order them to make preparations for our journey." Chapter 3. Roundabout. Woot and Wanderer slept that night in the tin castle of the Emperor of the Winkies, and found his tin bed quite comfortable. Early the next morning he rose and took a walk through the gardens, where there were tin fountains and beds of curious tin flowers, and where tin birds perched upon the branches of tin trees and sang songs that sounded like the notes of tin whistles. All these wonders had been made by the clever Winkie tinsmiths, who wound the birds up every morning so that they would move about and sing. After breakfast, the boy went into the throne room, where the Emperor was having his tin joints carefully oiled by a servant, while other servants were stuffing sweet, refreshing straw into the body of the Scarecrow. Woot watched this operation with much interest, for the Scarecrow's body was only a suit of clothes filled with straw. The coat was buttoned tight to keep the packed straw from falling out, and a rope was tied around the waist to hold it in shape and prevent the straw from sagging down. The Scarecrow's head was a gunny sack filled with bran, on which his eyes, nose, and mouth had been painted. His hands were white cotton gloves stuffed with straw. Woot noticed that even when carefully stuffed and patted into shape, the straw man was awkward in his movements and decidedly wobbly on his feet, so the boy wondered if the Scarecrow would be able to travel with them all the way to the forests of the Munchkin Country of Oz. The preparations made for this important journey were very simple. A knapsack was filled with food and given Woot the Wanderer to carry upon his back, for the food was for his use alone. The Tin Woodman shouldered an axe which was sharp and brightly polished, and the Scarecrow put the Emperor's oil can in his pocket, that he might oil his friends' joints should they need it. "Who will govern the Winkie Country during your absence?" asked the boy. "Why, the country will run itself," answered the Emperor. "As a matter of fact, my people do not need an emperor, for Ozma of Oz watches over the welfare of all her subjects, including the Winkies. Like a good many kings and emperors, I have a grand title, but very little real power, which allows me time to amuse myself in my own way. The people of Oz have but one law to obey, which is, behave yourself, so it is easy for them to abide by this law, and you'll notice they behave very well. But it is time for us to be off, and I am eager to start because I suppose that the poor Munchkin girl is anxiously awaiting my coming." "She's waited a long time already, seems to me," remarked the Scarecrow as they left the grounds of the castle and followed a path that led eastward. "True," replied the Tin Woodman, "but I've noticed that the last end of a wait, however long it has been, is the hardest to endure, so I must try to make Nimmie Amee happy as soon as possible." "Ah, that proves you have a kind heart," remarked the Scarecrow approvingly. "It's too bad he hasn't a loving heart," said Woot. "This Tin Man is going to marry a nice girl through kindness, and not because he loves her, and somehow that doesn't seem quite right. Even so, I am not sure it isn't best for the girl," said the Scarecrow, who seemed very intelligent for a straw man, for a loving husband is not always kind, while a kind husband is sure to make any girl content. "Nimmie Amee will become an empress," announced the Tin Woodman proudly. "I shall have a tin gown made for her, with tin ruffles and tucks on it, and she shall have tin slippers, and tin earrings and bracelets, and wear a tin crown on her head. I'm sure that will delight Nimmie Amee, for all the girls are fond of finery." "Are we going to the Munchkin Country by way of the Emerald City?" inquired the Scarecrow, who looked upon the Tin Woodman as the leader of the party. "I think not," was the reply. "We are engaged upon a rather delicate adventure, for we are seeking a girl who fears her former lover has forgotten her. It will be rather hard for me, you must admit, when I confess to Nimmie Amee that I have come to marry her because it is my duty to do so, and therefore the fewer witnesses there are to our meeting, the better for both of us. After I have found Nimmie Amee, and she has managed to control her joy at our reunion, I shall take her to the Emerald City and introduce her to Ozma and Dorothy, and to Betsy Bobbin and Tiny Trot, and all our other friends. But, if I remember rightly, poor Nimmie Amee has a sharp tongue when angry, and she may be a trifle angry with me at first, because I have been so long in coming to her." "I can understand that," said Woot gravely, "but how can we get to the part of the Munchkin Country where you once lived without passing through the Emerald City?" "Why, that is easy," the Tin Man assured him. "I have a map of Oz in my pocket," persisted the boy, "and it shows that the Winkie Country, where we are now, is at the west of Oz, and the Munchkin Country at the east, while directly between them lies the Emerald City." "True enough, but we shall go toward the north, first of all, into the Gillikin country, and so pass around the Emerald City," explained the Tin Woodman. "That may prove a dangerous journey," replied the boy. "I used to live in one of the top corners of the Gillikin country, near to Oogaboo, and I have been told that in this Northland country are many people whom it is not pleasant to meet. I was very careful to avoid them during my journey south. A wanderer should have no fear, observed the Scarecrow, who was wobbling along in a funny, haphazard manner, but keeping pace with his friends. Fear does not make one a coward, returned Woot, growing a little red in the face, but I believe it is more easy to avoid danger than to overcome it. The safest way is the best way, even for one who is brave and determined. Don't worry, for we shall not go far to the north, said the Emperor. My one idea is to avoid the Emerald City without going out of our way more than is necessary. Once around the Emerald City, we will turn south into the Munchkin Country, where the Scarecrow and I are well acquainted and have many friends. I have travelled some in the Gillikin country, remarked the Scarecrow, and while I must say I have met some strange people there at times, I have never yet been harmed by them. Well, it's all the same to me, said Woot, with assumed carelessness. Dangers, when they cannot be avoided, are often quite interesting, and I'm willing to go wherever you two venture to go. So, they left the path they had been following and began to travel toward the northeast. And all that day they were in the pleasant Winkie Country, and all the people they met saluted the Emperor with great respect and wished him good luck on his journey. At night, they stopped at a house where they were well entertained and where Woot was given a comfortable bed to sleep in. Were the Scarecrow and I alone, said the Tin Woodman, we would travel by night as well as by day, but with a meat person in our party, we must halt at night to permit him to rest. Meat tires after a day's travel, added the Scarecrow, while straw and tin never tire at all, which proves, said he, that we are somewhat superior to people made in a common way. Woot could not deny that he was tired, and he slept soundly until morning, when he was given a good breakfast, smoking hot. You two miss a great deal by not eating, he said to his companions. It is true, responded the Scarecrow. We miss suffering from hunger when food cannot be had, and we miss a stomachache now and then. As he said this, the Scarecrow glanced at the Tin Woodman, who nodded his assent. All that second day they travelled steadily, entertaining one another, the while with stories of adventures they had formerly met and listening to the Scarecrow recite poetry. He had learnt a great many poems from Professor Wogglebug, and loved to repeat them whenever anybody would listen to him. Of course, Woot and the Tin Woodman now listened because they could not do otherwise, unless they rudely ran away from their stuffed comrade. One of the Scarecrow's recitations was like this. What sound is so sweet as the straw from the wheat, when it crunkles so tender and low? It is yellow and bright, so it gives me delight to crunkle wherever I go. Sweet, fresh, golden straw, there is surely no flaw in a stuffing so clean and compact. It creaks when I walk, and it thrills when I talk, and its fragrance is fine for a fact. To cut me don't hurt, for I've no blood to squirt, and therefore can suffer no pain. The straw that I use doesn't lump up or bruise, though it's pounded again and again. I know it is said that my beautiful head has brains of mixed wheat straw and bran, but my thoughts are so good I'd not change if I could, for the brains of a common meat man. Content with my lot, I'm glad that I'm not like others I meet day by day. If my insides get musty, or mussed up or dusty, I get newly stuffed right away. Chapter 4. The Loons of Loonville. Toward evening, the travellers found there was no longer a path to guide them, and the purple hues of the grass and trees warned them that they were now in the country of the Gillikins, where strange peoples dwelt in places that were quite unknown to the other inhabitants of Oz. The fields were wild and uncultivated, and there were no houses of any sort to be seen, but our friends kept on walking even after the sun went down, hoping to find a good place for Woot the Wanderer to sleep. But when it grew quite dark, and the boy was weary with his long walk, they halted right in the middle of a field and allowed Woot to get his supper from the food he carried in his knapsack. Then the Scarecrow laid himself down so that Woot could use his stuffed body as a pillow, and the Tin Woodman stood up beside them all night, so the dampness of the ground might not rust his joints or dull his brilliant polish. Whenever the dew settled on his body, he carefully wiped it off with a cloth, and so in the morning the Emperor shone as brightly as ever in the rays of the rising sun. They wakened the boy at daybreak, the Scarecrow saying to him, "We have discovered something queer, and therefore we must counsel together what to do about it." "What have you discovered?" asked Woot, rubbing the sleep from his eyes with his knuckles and giving 3 wide yawns to prove he was fully awake. "A sign," said the Tin Woodman, "a sign and another path." "What does the sign say?" inquired the boy. "It says that all strangers are warned not to follow this path to Loonville," answered the Scarecrow, who could read very well when his eyes had been freshly painted. "In that case," said the boy, opening his knapsack to get some breakfast, "let us travel in some other direction." But this did not seem to please either of his companions. "I'd like to see what Loonville looks like," remarked the Tin Woodman. "When one travels, it is foolish to miss any interesting sight," added the Scarecrow. "But a warning means danger," protested Woot the Wanderer, "and I believe it's sensible to keep out of danger whenever we can." They made no reply to this speech for a while. Then said the Scarecrow, "I have escaped so many dangers during my lifetime that I am not much afraid of anything that can happen." "Nor am I," exclaimed the Tin Woodman, swinging his glittering axe around his tin head in a series of circles. "Few things can injure tin, and my axe is a powerful weapon to use against a foe. But our boy and friend," he continued, looking solemnly at Woot, "might perhaps be injured if the people of Loonville are really dangerous. So I propose he waits here while you and I, friend Scarecrow, visit the forbidden city of Loonville." "Don't worry about me," advised Woot calmly. "Wherever you wish to go, I will go and share your dangers. During my wanderings, I have found it more wise to keep out of danger than to venture in. But at that time I was alone, and now I have 2 powerful friends to protect me." So, when he had finished his breakfast, they all set out along the path that led to Loonville. "It is a place I have never heard of before," remarked the Scarecrow, as they approached a dense forest. "The inhabitants may be people of some sort, or they may be animals, but whatever they prove to be, we will have an interesting story to relate to Dorothy and Ozma on our return." The path led into the forest, but the big trees grew so closely together and the vines and underbrush were so thick and matted that they had to clear a path at each step in order to proceed. In 1 or 2 places, the Tin Man, who went first to clear the way, cut the branches with a blow of his axe. Woot followed next, and last of the 3 came the Scarecrow, who could not have kept the path at all had not his comrades broken the way for his straw-stuffed body. Presently the Tin Woodman pushed his way through some heavy underbrush, and almost tumbled headlong into a vast cleared space in the forest. The clearing was circular, big and roomy, yet the top branches of the tall trees reached over and formed a complete dome or roof for it. Strangely enough, it was not dark in this immense natural chamber in the woodland, for the place glowed with a soft white light that seemed to come from some unseen source. In the chamber were grouped dozens of queer creatures, and these so astonished the Tin Man that Woot had to push his metal body aside, that he might see too. And the Scarecrow pushed Woot aside, so that the 3 travellers stood in a row, staring with all their eyes. The creatures they beheld were round and ball-like, round in body, round in legs and arms, round in hands and feet, and round of head. The only exception to the roundness was a slight hollow on the top of each head, making it saucer-shaped instead of dome-shaped. They wore no clothes on their puffy bodies, nor had they any hair. Their skins were all of a light grey colour, and their eyes were mere purple spots. Their noses were as puffy as the rest of them. "Are they rubber, do you think?" asked the Scarecrow, who noticed that the creatures bounded as they moved, and seemed almost as light as air. "It is difficult to tell what they are," answered Woot. "They seem to be covered with warts." The loons, for so these folks were called, had been doing many things, some playing together, some working at tasks, and some gathered in groups to talk. But at that sound of strange voices, which echoed rather loudly through the clearing, all turned in the direction of the intruders. Then, in a body, they all rushed forward, running and bounding with tremendous speed. The Tin Woodman was so surprised by this sudden dash that he had no time to raise his axe before the loons were on them. The creatures swung their puffy hands, which looked like boxing gloves, and pounded the three travellers as hard as they could on all sides. The blows were quite soft and did not hurt our friends at all, but the onslaught quite bewildered them, so that in a brief period all three were knocked over and fell flat upon the ground. Once down, many of the loons held them to prevent their getting up again, while others wound long tendrils of vines about them, binding their arms and legs to their bodies, and so rendering them helpless. "Aha!" cried the biggest loon of all. "We've got 'em safe, so let's carry 'em to King Baum and have 'em tried and condemned and perforated." They had to drag their captives to the centre of the domed chamber, for their weight, as compared with that of the loons, prevented their being carried. Even the Scarecrow was much heavier than the puffy loons, but finally the party halted before a raised platform on which stood a sort of throne consisting of a big, wide chair with a string tied to one arm of it. This string led upward to the roof of the dome. Arranged before the platform, the prisoners were allowed to sit up, facing the empty throne. "Good," said the big loon who had commanded the party. "Now to get King Baum to judge these terrible creatures we have so bravely captured." As he spoke, he took hold of the string and began to pull as hard as he could. One or two of the others helped him, and pretty soon, as they drew in the cord, the leaves above them parted, and a loon appeared at the other end of the string. It didn't take long to draw him down to the throne, where he seated himself and was tied in, so he wouldn't float upward again. "Hello," said the king, blinking his purple eyes at his followers. "What's up now?" "Strangers, your majesty, strangers and captives," replied the big loon pompously. "Dear me, I see 'em very plainly," exclaimed the king, his purple eyes bulging out as he looked at these three prisoners. "What curious animals! Are they dangerous, do you think, my good Panther?" "I'm afraid so, your majesty, of course. They may not be dangerous, but we mustn't take chances. Enough accidents happen to us poor loons as it is, and my advice is to condemn and perforate 'em as quickly as possible." "Keep your advice to yourself," said the monarch in a peeved tone. "Who's king here anyhow, you or me?" "We made you our king because you have less common sense than the rest of us," answered Pantaloon indignantly. "I could have been king myself had I wanted to, but I didn't care for the hard work and responsibility." As he said this, the big loon strutted back and forth in the space between the throne of King Baum and the prisoners, and the other loons seemed much impressed by his defiance. But suddenly there came a sharp report, and Pantaloon instantly disappeared, to the great astonishment of the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, and Woot the Wanderer, who saw on the spot where the big fellow had stood a little heap of flabby, wrinkled skin that looked like a collapsed rubber balloon. "There," exclaimed the king, "I expected that would happen. The conceited rascal wanted to puff himself up until he was bigger than the rest of you, and this is the result of his folly. Get the pump working, some of you, and blow him up again." "We will have to mend the puncture first, Your Majesty," suggested one of the loons, and the prisoners noticed that none of them seemed surprised or shocked at the sad accident to Panther. "All right," grumbled the king, "fetch Till to mend him." One or two ran away and presently returned, followed by a lady loon wearing huge, puffed-up rubber skirts. Also, she had a purple feather fastened to a wart on the top of her head, and around her waist was a sash of fibre-like vines, dried and tough, that looked like strings. "Get to work, Till," commanded King Baum. "Panther has just exploded." The lady loon picked up the bunch of skin and examined it carefully until she discovered a hole in one foot. Then she pulled a strand of string from her sash and, drawing the edges of the hole together, she tied them fast with a string, thus making one of those curious warts which the strangers had noticed on so many loons. Having done this, Till Loon tossed the bit of skin to the other loons and was about to go away when she noticed the prisoners and stopped to inspect them. "Dear me," said Till, "what dreadful creatures! Where did they come from?" "We captured them," replied one of the loons. "And what are we going to do with them?" inquired the girl loon. "Perhaps we'll condemn 'em and puncture 'em," answered the king. "Well," said she, still eyeing them, "I'm not sure they'll puncture. Let's try it and see." One of the loons ran to the forest's edge and quickly returned with a long, sharp thorn. He glanced at the king, who nodded his head in assent, and then he rushed forward and stuck the thorn into the leg of the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow merely smiled and said nothing, for the thorn didn't hurt him at all. Then the loon tried to prick the Tin Woodman's leg, but the tin only blunted the point of the thorn. "Just as I thought," said Till, blinking her purple eyes and shaking her puffy head. But just then the loon stuck the thorn into the leg of Woot the Wanderer, and while it had been blunted somewhat, it was still sharp enough to hurt. "Ouch!" yelled Woot, and kicked out his leg with so much energy that the frail bonds that tied him burst apart. His foot caught the loon, who was leaning over him, full on his puffy stomach, and sent him shooting up into the air. When he was high over their heads, he exploded with a loud pop, and his skin fell to the ground. "I really believe," said the king, rolling his spot-like eyes in a frightened way, "that Panther was right in claiming these prisoners are dangerous. Is the pump ready?" Some of the loons had wheeled a big machine in front of the throne and now took Panther's skin and began to pump air into it. Slowly, it swelled out until the king cried, "Stop!" "No, no," yelled Panther, "I'm not big enough yet." "You're as big as you're going to be," declared the king. "Before you exploded, you were bigger than the rest of us, and that caused you to be proud and overbearing. Now you're a little smaller than the rest, and you will last longer and be more humble." Pump me up," wailed Panther. "If you don't, you'll break my heart." "If we do, we'll break your skin," replied the king. So the loon stopped pumping air into Panther and pushed him away from the pump. He was certainly more humble than before his accident, for he crept into the background and said nothing more. "Now pump up the other one," ordered the king. Till had already mended him, and the loon set to work to pump him full of air. During these last few moments, none had paid much attention to the prisoners, so Woot, finding his legs free, crept over to the Tin Woodman and rubbed the bonds that were still around his arms and body against the sharp edge of the axe, which quickly cut them. The boy was now free, and the thorn which the loon had stuck into his leg was lying unnoticed on the ground, where the creature had dropped it when he exploded. Woot leaned forward and picked up the thorn, and while the loons were busy watching the pump, the boy sprang to his feet and suddenly rushed upon the group. Pop, pop, pop went 3 of the loons when the Wanderer pricked them with his thorn, and at the sounds the others looked around and saw their danger. With yells of fear they bounded away in all directions, scattering about the clearing, with Woot the Wanderer in full chase. While they could run much faster than the boy, they often stumbled and fell or got in one another's way, so he managed to catch several and prick them with his thorn. It astonished him to see how easily the loons exploded. When the air was let out of them, they were quite helpless. Till Loon was one of those who ran against his thorn, and many others suffered the same fate. The creatures could not escape from the enclosure, but in their fright, many bounded upward and caught branches of the trees, and then climbed out of reach of the dreaded thorn. Woot was getting pretty tired chasing them, so he stopped and came over, panting, to where his friends were sitting, still bound. "Very well done, my wanderer," said the Tin Woodman. "It is evident that we fear these puffed-up creatures no longer. So be kind enough to unfasten our bonds, and we will proceed upon our journey." Woot untied the bonds of the Scarecrow and helped him to his feet. Then he freed the Tin Woodman, who got up without help. Looking around them, they saw that the only loon now remaining within reach was Baum, the king, who had remained seated in his throne, watching the punishment of his people with a bewildered look in his purple eyes. "Shall I puncture the king?" the boy asked his companions. King Baum must have overheard the questions, for he fumbled with the cord that fastened him to the throne and managed to release it. Then he floated upward until he reached the leafy dome, and parting the branches he disappeared from sight. But the string that was tied to his body was still connected with the arm of the throne, and they knew they could pull his majesty down again if they wanted to. "Let him alone," suggested the Scarecrow. "He seems a good enough king for his peculiar people, and after we are gone, the loons will have something of a job to pump up all those whom Woot has punctured." "Every one of them ought to be exploded," declared Woot, who was angry because his leg still hurt him. "No," said the Tin Woodman, "that would not be just fair. They were quite right to capture us, because we had no business to intrude here. This is their country, not ours, and since the poor things can't get out of the clearing, they can harm no one save those who venture here out of curiosity, as we did." "Well said, my friend," agreed Tall Scarecrow. "We really had no right to disturb their peace and comfort, so let us go away." They easily found the place where they had forced their way into the enclosure, so the Tin Woodman pushed aside the underbrush and started first along the path. The Scarecrow followed next, and last came Woot, who looked back and saw that the loons were still clinging to their perches on the trees and watching their former captives with frightened eyes. "I guess they're glad to see the last of us," remarked the boy, and, laughing at the happy ending of the adventure, he followed his comrades along the path. Chapter 5. Mrs. Yoop, the Giantess. When they had reached the end of the path where they had first seen the warning sign, they set off across the country in an easterly direction. Before long they reached rolling lands, which were a succession of hills and valleys, where constant climbs and descents were required, and their journey now became tedious because, on climbing each hill, they found before them nothing in the valley below it except grass or weeds or stones. Up and down they went for hours with nothing to relieve the monotony of the landscape, until finally, when they had topped a higher hill than usual, they discovered a cup-shaped valley before them, in the centre of which stood an enormous castle built of purple stone. The castle was high and broad and long, but had no turrets and towers. So far as they could see, there was but one small window and one big door on each side of the great building. "This is strange," mused the Scarecrow. "I'd no idea such a big castle existed in the Gillikin country. I wonder who lives here. It seems to me from this distance," remarked the Tin Woodman, "that it's the biggest castle I ever saw. It is really too big for any use, and no one could open or shut those big doors without a stepladder. Perhaps if we go nearer, we shall find out whether anybody lives there or not," suggested Woot. "Looks to me as if nobody lived there." On they went, and when they reached the centre of the valley, where the great stone castle stood, it was beginning to grow dark. So they hesitated as to what to do. "If friendly people happen to live here," said Woot, "I shall be glad of a bed. But should enemies occupy the place, I prefer to sleep upon the ground." "And if no one at all lives here," added the Scarecrow, "we can enter, and take possession, and make ourselves at home." While speaking, he went nearer to one of the great doors, which was 3 times as high and broad as any he had ever seen in a house before, and then he discovered, engraved in big letters upon a stone over the doorway, the words, "Yoop Castle." "Oh-ho!" he exclaimed. "I know the place now. This was probably the home of Mr. Yoop, a terrible giant whom I have seen confined in a cage a long way from here. Therefore, this castle is likely to be empty, and we may use it in any way we please." "Yes, yes," said the Tin Emperor, nodding. "I also remember Mr. Yoop, but how are we to get into his deserted castle? The latch of the door is so far above our heads that none of us can reach it." They considered this problem for a while, and then Woot said to the Tin Man, "If I stand upon your shoulders, I think I can unlatch the door." "Climb up then," was the reply, and when the boy was perched upon the tin shoulders of Nick Chopper, he was just able to reach the latch and raise it. At once the door swung open, its great hinges making a groaning sound as if in protest. So Woot leaped down and followed his companions into a big, bare hallway. Scarcely were there 3 inside, however, when they heard the door slam shut behind them, and this astonished them because no one had touched it. It had closed of its own accord as if by magic. Moreover, the latch was on the outside, and the thought occurred to each one of them that they were now prisoners in this unknown castle. "However," mumbled the Scarecrow, "we are not to blame for what cannot be helped, so let us push bravely ahead and see what may be seen." It was quite dark in the hallway, now that the outside door was shut, so as they stumbled along a stone passage, they kept close together, not knowing what danger was likely to befall them. Suddenly, a soft glow enveloped them. It grew brighter until they could see their surroundings distinctly. They had reached the end of the passage, and before them was another huge door. This noiselessly swung open before them without the help of anyone, and through the doorway they observed a big chamber, the walls of which were lined with plates of pure gold, highly polished. This room was also lighted, although they could discover no lamps, and in the centre of it was a great table at which sat an immense woman. She was clad in silver robes embroidered with gay floral designs, and wore over this splendid raiment a short apron of elaborate lacework. Such an apron was no protection, and was not in keeping with the handsome gown, but the huge woman wore it nevertheless. The table at which she sat was spread with a white cloth and had golden dishes upon it. So the travellers saw that they had surprised the giantess while she was eating her supper. She had her back toward them and did not even turn around, but taking a biscuit from a dish, she began to butter it and said in a voice that was big and deep, but not especially unpleasant, "Why don't you come in and allow the door to shut? You're causing us draught, and I shall catch a cold and sneeze. When I sneeze, I get cross, and when I get cross, I'm liable to do something wicked. Come in, you foolish strangers, come in." Being thus urged, they entered the room and approached the table until they stood where they faced the great giantess. She continued eating, but smiled in a curious way as she looked at them. Woot noticed that the door had closed silently after they had entered, and that didn't please him at all. "Well," said the giantess, "what excuse have you to offer?" "We didn't know anyone lived here, madame," explained the Scarecrow. "So, being travellers and strangers in these parts, and wishing to find a place for our boyfriend to sleep, we ventured to enter your castle." "You knew it was private property, I suppose," said she, buttering another biscuit. "We saw the words Yoop Castle over the door, but we knew that Mr. Yoop is a prisoner in a cage in a far-off part of the land of Oz, so we decided there was no one now at home and that we might use the castle for the night." "I see," remarked the giantess, nodding her head and smiling again in that curious way, a way that made Woot shudder. "You didn't know that Mr. Yoop was married, or that after he was cruelly captured, his wife still lived in his castle and ran it to suit herself." "Who captured Mr. Yoop?" asked Woot, looking gravely at the big woman. "Wicked enemies, people who selfishly objected to Yoop's taking their cows and sheep for his food. I must admit, however, that Yoop had a bad temper and had the habit of knocking over a few houses now and then when he was angry. So one day, the little folks came in a great crowd and captured Mr. Yoop and carried him away to a cage somewhere in the mountains. I don't know where it is, and I don't care, for my husband treated me badly at times, forgetting the respect a giant owes to a giantess. Often he kicked me on my shins when I wouldn't wait on him, so I'm glad he's gone." "It's a wonder the people didn't capture you too," remarked Woot. "Well, I was too clever for them," said she, giving a sudden laugh that caused such a breach that the wobbly Scarecrow was almost blown off his feet and had to grab his friend Nick Chopper to steady himself. "I saw the people coming," continued Mrs. Yoop, "and knowing they meant mischief, I transformed myself into a mouse and hid in a cupboard. After they had gone away, carrying my shin-kicking husband with them, I transformed myself back to my former shape again, and here I've lived in peace and comfort ever since." "Are you a witch, then?" inquired Woot. "Well, not exactly a witch," she replied, "but I'm an artist in transformations. In other words, I'm more of a Yookahoo than a witch, and of course you know that the Yookahoos are the cleverest magic workers in the world." The travellers were silent for a time, uneasily considering this statement and the effect it might have on their future. No doubt the giantess had wilfully made them her prisoners, yet she spoke so cheerfully, in her big voice, that until now they had not been alarmed in the least. By and by the Scarecrow, whose mixed brains had been working steadily, asked the woman, "Are we to consider you our friend, Mrs. Yoop, or do you intend to be our enemy?" "I never have friends," she said in a matter-of-fact tone, "because friends get too familiar and always forget to mind their own business." "But I'm not your enemy, not yet anyhow. Indeed, I'm glad you've come, for my life here is rather lonely. I've had no one to talk to since I transformed Polychrome, the daughter of the rainbow, into a canary bird." "How did you manage to do that?" asked the Tin Woodman in amazement. "Polychrome is a powerful fairy." "She was," said the giantess, "but now she's a canary bird. One day After a rain, Polychrome danced off the rainbow and fell asleep on a little mound in this valley, not far from my castle. The sun came out and drove the rainbow away, and before Polly wakened, I stole out and transformed her into a canary bird in a gold cage studded with diamonds. The cage was so she couldn't fly away. I expected she'd sing and talk and we'd have good times together, but she has proved no company for me at all. Ever since the moment of her transformation, she has refused to speak a single word. Where is she now? Inquired Woot, who had heard tales of lovely Polychrome and was much interested in her. The cage is hanging up in my bedroom, said the giantess, eating another biscuit. The travellers were now more uneasy and suspicious of the giantess than before. If Polychrome, the rainbow's daughter, who was a real fairy, had been transformed and enslaved by this huge woman who claimed to be a Yuku, what was liable to happen to them? Said the Scarecrow, twisting his stuffed head around in Mrs. Yube's direction. Do you know, ma'am, who we are? Of course, said she. A straw man, a tin man, and a boy. We are very important people, declared the Tin Woodman. All the better, she replied. I shall enjoy your society the more on that account. For I mean to keep you here as long as I live, to amuse me when I get lonely, and, she added slowly, in this valley, no one ever dies. They didn't like this speech at all, so the Scarecrow frowned in a way that made Mrs. Yupe smile, while the Tin Woodman looked so fierce that Mrs. Yupe laughed. The Scarecrow suspected she was going to laugh, so he slipped behind his friends to escape the wind from her breath. From this safe position, he said warningly, we have powerful friends who will soon come to rescue us. Let them come, she returned, with an accent of scorn. When they get here, they will find neither a boy nor a tin man, nor a scarecrow, for tomorrow morning I intend to transform you all into other shapes, so that you cannot be recognized. This threat filled them with dismay. The good-natured giantess was more terrible than they had imagined. She could smile and wear pretty clothes and, at the same time, be even more cruel than her wicked husband had been. Both the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman tried to think of some way to escape from the castle before morning, but she seemed to read their thoughts and shook her head. Don't worry your poor brains, said she. You can't escape me, however hard you try. But why should you wish to escape? I shall give you new forms that are much better than the ones you now have. Be contented with your fate, for discontent leads to unhappiness, and unhappiness in any form is the greatest evil that can befall you. What forms do you intend to give us? Asked Woot earnestly. I haven't decided as yet. I'll dream over it tonight, so in the morning I shall have made up my mind how to transform you. Perhaps you prefer to choose your own transformations? No, said Woot. I prefer to remain as I am. That's funny, she retorted. You are little, and you're weak. As you are, you're not much account, anyhow. The best thing about you is that you're alive, for I shall be able to make of you some sort of live creature, which will be a great improvement on your present form. She took another biscuit from a plate and dipped it in a pot of honey, and calmly began eating it. The Scarecrow watched her thoughtfully. There are no fields of grain in your valley, said he. Where, then, did you get the flour to make your biscuits? Mercy me, do you think I'd bother to make biscuits out of flour? She replied. That is altogether too tedious a process for a yukahu. I set some traps this afternoon and caught a lot of field mice, but as I do not like to eat mice, I transformed them into hot biscuits for my supper. The honey in this spot was once a wasp's nest, but since being transformed, it has become sweet and delicious. All I need to do when I wish to eat is to take something I don't care to keep and transform it into any sort of food I like and eat it. Are you hungry? I don't eat, thank you, said the Scarecrow. Nor do I, said the Tin Woodman. I have still a little natural food in my knapsack, said Woot the Wanderer, and I'd rather eat that than any wasp's nest. Everyone to his taste, said the giantess carelessly, and having now finished her supper, she rose to her feet, clapped her hands together, and the supper table at once disappeared. Chapter 6. The Magic of a Yukahu. Woot had seen very little of magic during his wanderings, while the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman had seen a great deal of many sorts in their lives. Yet all three were greatly impressed by Mrs. Yupe's powers. She did not affect any mysterious airs or indulge in chants or mystic rites, as most witches do, nor was the giantess old and ugly or disagreeable in face or manner. Nevertheless, she frightened her prisoners more than any witch could have done. "Please be seated," she said to them, as she sat herself down in a great armchair and spread her beautiful embroidered skirts for them to admire. But all the chairs in the room were so high that our friends could not climb to the seats of them. Mrs. Yupe observed this and waved her hand, when instantly a gold ladder appeared leaning against a chair opposite to her own. "Climb up," said she, and they obeyed, the Tin Man and the boy assisting the more clumsy Scarecrow. When they were all seated in a row on the cushion of the chair, the giantess continued, "Now tell me how you happened to travel in this direction, and where you came from, and what your errand is." So the Tin Woodman told her all about Nimmie Amee, and how he had decided to find her and marry her, although he had no loving heart. The story seemed to amuse the big woman, who then began to ask the Scarecrow questions, and for the first time in her life heard of Ozma of Oz, and of Dorothy, and Jack Pumpkinhead, and Dr. Pipt, and Tick-Tock, and many other Oz people who are well known in the Emerald City. Also, Woot had to tell his story, which was very simple and did not take long. The giantess laughed heartily when the boy related their adventure at Loonville, but said she knew nothing of the loons because she never left her valley. "There are wicked people who would like to capture me, as they did my husband, my giant husband, Mr. Yupe," said she, "so I stay at home and mind my own business." "If Ozma knew that you dared to work magic without her consent, she would punish you severely," declared the Scarecrow, "for this castle is in the land of Oz, and no persons in the land of Oz are permitted to work magic except Glinda the Good and the little wizard who lives with Ozma in the Emerald City." "That for your Ozma!" exclaimed the giantess, snapping her fingers in derision. "What do I care for a girl whom I have never seen, and who has never seen me?" "But Ozma is a fairy," said the Tin Woodman, "and therefore she is very powerful. Also, we are under Ozma's protection, and to injure us in any way would make her extremely angry. What I do here in my own private castle, in this secluded valley, where no one comes but fools like you, can never be known to your fairy Ozma," returned the giantess. "Do not seek to frighten me from my purpose, and do not allow yourselves to be frightened, for it is best to meet bravely what cannot be avoided. I'm now going to bed, and in the morning I will give you all new forms, such as will be more interesting to me than the ones you now wear. Good night, and pleasant dreams." Saying this, Mrs. Yupe rose from her chair and walked through a doorway into another room. So heavy was the tread of the giantess that even the walls of the big stone castle trembled as she stepped. She closed the door of her bedroom behind her, and then suddenly the light went out and the three prisoners found themselves in total darkness. The Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow didn't mind the dark at all, but Woot the Wanderer felt worried to be left in this strange place, in this strange manner, without being able to see any danger that might threaten. "The big woman might have given me a bed anyhow," he said to his companions, and scarcely had he spoken when he felt something press against his legs, which were then dangling from the seat of the chair. Leaning down, he put out his hand and found that a bedstead had appeared, with mattress, sheets and covers, all complete. He lost no time in slipping down upon the bed and was soon fast asleep. During the night, the Scarecrow and the Emperor talked in low tones together, and they got out of the chair and moved all about the room, feeling for some hidden spring that might open a door or window and permit them to escape. Morning found them still unsuccessful in the quest, and as soon as it was daylight, Woot's bed suddenly disappeared, and he dropped to the floor with a thump that quickly wakened him. And after a time, the giantess came from her bedroom, wearing another dress that was quite as elaborate as the one in which she had been attired the evening before, and also wearing the pretty lace apron. Having seated herself in a chair, she said, "I'm hungry, so I'll have breakfast at once." She clapped her hands together, and instantly the table appeared before her, spread with snowy linen and laden with golden dishes. But there was no food upon the table, nor anything else except a pitcher of water, a bundle of weeds, and a handful of pebbles. But the giantess poured some water into her coffee pot, patted it once or twice with her hand, and then poured out a cupful of steaming hot coffee. "Would you like some?" she asked Woot. He was suspicious of magic coffee, but it smelt so good that he could not resist it, so he answered, "If you please, madame." The giantess poured out another cup and set it on the floor for Woot. It was as big as a tub, and the golden spoon in the saucer beside the cup was so heavy the boy could scarcely lift it. But Woot managed to get a sip of the coffee and found it delicious. Mrs. Yoop next transformed the weeds into a dish of oatmeal, which she ate with good appetite. "Now then," said she, picking up the pebbles, "I'm wondering whether I shall have fish balls or lamb chops to complete my meal. Which would you prefer, Woot the Wanderer?" "If you please, I'll eat the food in my knapsack," answered the boy. "Your magic food might taste good, but I'm afraid of it." The woman laughed at his fears and transformed the pebbles into fish balls. "I suppose you think that after you had eaten this food it would turn to stones again and make you sick," she remarked. "But that would be impossible. Nothing I transform ever gets back to its former shape again, so these fish balls can never more be pebbles. That is why I have to be careful of my transformations," she added, busily eating while she talked, "for while I can change forms at will, I can never change them back again, which proves that even the powers of a clever Yukahu are limited. When I have transformed you 3 people, you must always wear the shapes that I have given you." "Then please don't transform us," begged Woot, "for we are quite satisfied to remain as we are." "I am not expecting to satisfy you, but intend to please myself," she declared. "And my pleasure is to give you new shapes, for if by chance your friends came in search of you, not one of them would be able to recognize you." Her tone was so positive that they knew it would be useless to protest. The woman was not unpleasant to look at, her face was not cruel, her voice was big but gracious in tone, but her words showed that she possessed a merciless heart, and no pleadings would alter her wicked purpose. Mrs. Yoop took ample time to finish her breakfast, and the prisoners had no desire to hurry her. But finally, the meal was concluded, and she folded her napkin and made the table disappear by clapping her hands together. Then she turned to her captives and said, "The next thing on the program is to change your forms." "Have you decided what forms to give us?" asked the Scarecrow uneasily. "Yes, I dreamed it all out while I was asleep." This Tin Man seemed a very solemn person. Indeed, the Tin Woodman was looking solemn just then, for he was greatly disturbed. So I shall change him into an owl. All she did was to point one finger at him as she spoke, but immediately the form of the Tin Woodman began to change, and in a few seconds Nick Chopper, the Emperor of the Winkies, had been transformed into an owl, with eyes as big as saucers and a hooked beak and strong claws, but he was still tin. He was a tin owl with tin legs and beak and eyes and feathers. When he flew to the back of a chair and perched upon it, his tin feathers rattled against one another with a tiny clatter. The giantess seemed much amused by the tin owl's appearance, for her laugh was big and jolly. "You're not liable to get lost," said she, "for your wings and feathers will make a racket wherever you go. And on my word, a tin owl is so rare and pretty that it is an improvement on the ordinary bird. I did not intend to make you tin, but I forgot to wish you to be meat. However, tin you were and tin you are, and as it's too late to change you, that settles it." Until now, the Scarecrow had rather doubted the possibility of Mrs. Jupes being able to transform him, or his friend, the Tin Woodman, for they were not made as ordinary people are. He had worried more over what might happen to Woot than to himself, but now he began to worry about himself. "Madame," he said hastily, "I consider this action very impolite. It may be called rude even, considering we are your guests." "You are not guests, for I did not invite you here," she replied. "Perhaps not, but we craved hospitality. We threw ourselves upon your mercy, so to speak, and we now find you have no mercy. Therefore, if you will excuse the expression, I must say it is downright wicked to take our proper forms away from us and give us others that we do not care for." "Are you trying to make me angry?" she asked, frowning. "By no means," said the Scarecrow. "I'm just trying to make you act more ladylike." "Oh, indeed. In my opinion, Mr. Scarecrow, you are now acting like a bear, so a bear you shall be." Again the dreadful finger pointed, this time in the Scarecrow's direction, and at once his form began to change. In a few seconds he had become a small brown bear, but he was stuffed with straw as he had been before. And when the little brown bear shuffled across the floor, he was just as wobbly as the Scarecrow had been, and moved just as awkwardly. Woot was amazed, but he was also thoroughly frightened. "Did it hurt?" he asked the little brown bear. "No, of course not," growled the Scarecrow in the bear's form. "But I don't like walking on 4 legs. It's undignified." "Consider my humiliation," chirped the Tin Owl, trying to settle its tin feathers smoothly with its tin beak. "And I can't see very well either. The light seems to hurt my eyes." "That's because you are an owl," said Woot. "I think you will see better in the dark." "Well," remarked the giantess, "I'm very well pleased with these new forms on my part, and I'm sure you will like them better when you get used to them. So now," she added, turning to the boy, "it is your turn." "Don't you think you'd better leave me as I am?" asked Woot in a trembling voice. "No," she replied, "I'm going to make a monkey of you. I love monkeys, they're so cute, and I think a green monkey will be lots of fun and amuse me when I'm sad." Woot shivered, for again the terrible magic finger pointed and pointed directly his way. He felt himself changing, not so very much, however, and it didn't hurt him a bit. He looked down at his limbs and body and found that his clothes were gone and his skin covered with a fine, silk-like green fur. His hands and feet were now those of a monkey. He realized he really was a monkey, and his first feeling was one of anger. He began to chatter as monkeys do. He bounded to the seat of a giant chair, and then to its back, and then, with a wild leap, sprang upon the laughing giantess. His idea was to seize her hair and pull it out by the roots, and so have revenge for her wicked transformations. But she raised her hand and said, "Gently, my dear monkey, gently. You're not angry. You're happy, as can be." Woot stopped short. No, he wasn't a bit angry now. He felt as good, humoured, and gay as ever he did when a boy. Instead of pulling Mrs. Yoop's hair, he perched on her shoulder and smoothed her soft cheek with his hairy paw. In return, she smiled at the funny green animal and patted his head. "Very good," said the giantess. "Let us all become friends and be happy together. How is my tin owl feeling?" "Quite comfortable," said the owl. "I don't like it, to be sure, but I'm not going to allow my new form to make me unhappy. But tell me, please, what is a tin owl good for?" "You are only good to make me laugh," replied the giantess. "Will a stuffed bear also make you laugh?" inquired the Scarecrow, sitting back on his haunches to look up at her. "Of course," declared the giantess, "and I have added a little magic to your transformations to make you all contented with wearing your new forms. I'm sorry I didn't think to do that when I transformed Polychrome into a canary bird, but perhaps when she sees how cheerful you are, she will cease to be silent and sullen and to take to singing. I will go get the bird and let you see her." With this, Mrs. Yoop went into the next room and soon returned bearing a golden cage in which sat, upon a swinging perch, a lovely yellow canary. "Polychrome," said the giantess, "permit me to introduce you to a green monkey, which used to be a boy called Woot the Wanderer, and a tin owl, which used to be a tin woodman named Nig Chopper, and a straw-stuffed little brown bear, which used to be a live scarecrow." "We already know one another," declared the Scarecrow. "The bird is Polychrome, the rainbow's daughter, and she and I used to be good friends." "Are you really my old friend, the Scarecrow?" asked the bird, in a sweet, low voice. "There," cried Mrs. Yoop, "that's the first time she had spoken since she was transformed." "I'm really your old friend, yes, I am," answered the Scarecrow, "but you must pardon me for appearing just now in this brutal form." "I am a bird, as you are, dear Polly," said the Tin Woodman, "but alas, a tin owl is not as beautiful as a canary bird." "How dreadful it all is," sighed the canary. "Couldn't you manage to escape from this terrible Yookoohoo?" "No," answered the Scarecrow. "We tried to escape but failed. She first made us her prisoners and then transformed us. But how did she manage to get you, Polychrome?" "I was asleep, and she took unfair advantage of me," answered the bird sadly. "Had I been awake, I could easily have protected myself." "Tell me," said the green monkey earnestly, as he came close to the cage, "what must we do, daughter of the rainbow, to escape from these transformations? Can't you help us, being a fairy?" "At present I am powerless to help even myself," replied the canary. "That's the exact truth," exclaimed the giantess, who seemed pleased to hear the bird talk, even though it complained. "You are all helpless and in my power, so you may as well make up your minds to accept your fate and be content. Remember that you are transformed for good, since no magic on earth can break your enchantments. I am now going out for my morning walk. For each day after breakfast I will walk 16 times around my castle for exercise. Amuse yourselves while I am gone, and when I return I hope to find you all reconciled and happy." So the giantess walked to the door by which our friends had entered the great hall and spoke one word, "Open!" Then the door swung open, and after Mrs. Yoop had passed out it closed again, with a snap as its powerful bolts shot into place. The green monkey had rushed toward the opening, hoping to escape, but he was too late, and only got a bump on his nose as the door slammed shut. Chapter 7. The Lace Apron. "Now," said the canary in a tone more brisk than before, "we may talk together more freely, as Mrs. Yoop cannot hear us. Perhaps we can figure out a way to escape." "Open," said Woot the monkey, still facing the door, but his command had no effect, and he slowly rejoined the others. "You cannot open any door or window in this enchanted castle unless you are wearing the magic apron," said the canary. "What magic apron do you mean?" asked the Tin Owl in a curious voice. "The lace one, which the giantess always wears. I have been her prisoner in this cage for several weeks, and she hangs my cage in her bedroom every night so that she can keep her eye on me," explained Polychrome the canary. "Therefore I have discovered that it is the magic apron that opens the doors and windows, and nothing else can move them. When she goes to bed, Mrs. Yoop hangs her apron on the bedpost, and one morning she forgot to put it on when she commanded the door to open, and the door would not move. So then she put on the lace apron and the door obeyed her. That was how I learned the magic power of the apron." I see, said the little brown bear, wagging his stuffed head. "Then, if we could get the apron from Mrs. Yoop, we could open the doors and escape from our prison." "That is true, and it is the plan I was about to suggest," replied Polychrome, the canary bird. "However, I don't believe the owl could steal the apron or even the bear, but perhaps the monkey could hide in her room at night and get the apron while she is asleep." "I'll try it," cried Woot the monkey. "I'll try it this very night, if I can manage to steal into her bedroom. You mustn't think about it, though," warned the bird, "for she can read your thoughts whenever she cares to do so. And do not forget, before you escape, to take me with you. Once I am out of the power of the giantess, I may discover a way to save us all." "We won't forget our fairy friend," promised the boy, "but perhaps you can tell me how to get into the bedroom." "No," declared Polychrome, "I cannot advise you as to that. You must watch for a chance, and slip in when Mrs. Yoop isn't looking." They talked it over for a while longer, and then Mrs. Yoop returned. When she entered, the door opened suddenly, at her command, and closed as soon as her huge form had passed through the doorway. During that day, she entered her bedroom several times, on one errand or another, but always she commanded the door to close behind her, and her prisoners found not the slightest chance to leave the big hall in which they were confined. The green monkey thought it would be wise to make a friend of the big woman so as to gain her confidence, so he sat on the back of her chair and chatted to her while she mended her stockings and sewed silver buttons on some golden shoes that were as big as rowboats. This pleased the giantess, and she would pause at times to pat the monkey's head. The little brown bear curled up in a corner and lay still all day. The owl and the canary found they could converse together in the bird language, which neither the giantess nor the bear nor the monkey could understand. So at times they twittered away to each other and passed the long, dreary day quite cheerfully. After dinner, Mrs. Yoop took a big fiddle from a big cupboard and played such loud and dreadful music that her prisoners were all thankful when at last she stopped and said she was going to bed. After cautioning the monkey and bear and owl to behave themselves during the night, she picked up the cage containing the canary and, going to the door of her bedroom, commanded it to open. Just then, however, she remembered she had left her fiddle lying upon a table, so she went back for it and put it away in the cupboard. And while her back was turned, the green monkey slipped through the open door into her bedroom and hid underneath the bed. The giantess, being sleepy, did not notice this, and entering her room, she made the door close behind her and then hung the birdcage on a peg by the window. Then she began to undress, first taking off the lace apron and laying it over the bedpost, where it was within easy reach of her hand. As soon as Mrs. Yoop was in bed, the lights all went out, and Woot the monkey crouched under the bed and waited patiently until he heard the giantess snoring. Then he crept out and in the dark felt around until he got hold of the apron, which he at once tied around his own waist. Next, Woot tried to find the canary, and there was just enough moonlight showing through the window to enable him to see where the cage hung, but it was out of his reach. At first, he was tempted to leave Polychrome and escape with his other friends, but remembering his promise to the Rainbow Daughter, Woot tried to think how to save her. A chair stood near the window, and this, showing dimly in the moonlight, gave him an idea. By pushing it against it with all his might, he found he could move the giant chair a few inches at a time. So he pushed and pushed until the chair was beneath the birdcage, and then he sprang noiselessly upon the seat, for his monkey form enabled him to jump higher than he could do as a boy, and from there to take back the chair, and so managed to reach the cage and take it off the peg. Then down he sprang to the floor and made his way to the door. "Open," he commanded, and at once the door obeyed and swung open. But his voice awakened Mrs. Yoop, who gave a wild cry and sprang out of bed with one bound. The green monkey dashed through the doorway, carrying the cage with him, and before the giantess could reach the door, it slammed shut and imprisoned her in her own bedchamber. The noise she made, pounding upon the door, and her yells of anger and dreadful threats of vengeance filled all our friends with terror, and Woot the monkey was so excited that in the dark he could not find the outer door of the hall. But the Tin Owl could see very nicely in the dark, so he guided his friends to the right place, and when all were grouped before the door, Woot commanded it to open. The magic apron proved as powerful as when it had been worn by the giantess, so a moment later they had rushed through the passage and were standing in the fresh night air outside the castle, free to go wherever they willed. Chapter 8. The Menace of the Forest. "Quick," cried Polychrome the canary. "We must hurry, or Mrs. Yoop may find some way to recapture us, even now. Let us get out of her valley as soon as possible." So they set off toward the east, moving as swiftly as they could, and for a long time they could hear the yells and struggles of the imprisoned giantess. The green monkey could run over the ground very swiftly, and he carried with him the birdcage containing Polychrome, the Rainbow's daughter. Also, the Tin Owl could skip and fly along at a good rate of speed, his feathers rattling against one another with a tinkling sound as he moved. But this little brown bear, being stuffed with straw, was a clumsy traveller, and the others had to wait for him to follow. However, they were not very long in reaching the ridge that led out of Mrs. Yoop's valley, and when they had passed this ridge and descended into the next valley, they stopped to rest, for the green monkey was tired. "I believe we are safe now," said Polychrome, when her cage was set down and the others had all gathered around it, "for Mrs. Yoop dares not go outside of her own valley for fear of being captured by her enemies. So we may take our time to consider what to do next." "I'm afraid poor Mrs. Yoop will starve to death if no one lets her out of her bedroom," said Woot, who had a heart as kind as that of the Tin Woodman. "We've taken her magic apron away, and now the doors will never open." "Don't worry about that," advised Polychrome. "Mrs. Yoop has plenty of magic left to console her." "Are you sure of that?" asked the green monkey. "Yes, for I've been watching her for weeks," said the canary. "She has 6 magic hairpins, which she wears in her hair, and a magic ring which she wears on her thumb, and which is invisible to all eyes, except those of a fairy, and magic bracelets on both her ankles. So I am positive that she will manage to find a way out of her prison." "She might transform the door into an archway," suggested the little brown bear. That would be easy for her, said the Tin Owl, but I'm glad she was too angry to think of that before we got out of her valley. Well, we have escaped the big woman, to be sure, remarked the Green Monkey, but we still wear the awful forms the cruel Yukohu gave us. How are we going to get rid of these shapes and become ourselves again? None could answer that question. They sat around the cage, brooding over the problem, until the monkey fell asleep. Seeing this, the canary tucked her head under her wing and also slept, and the Tin Owl and the brown bear did not disturb them until morning came, and it was broad daylight. I'm hungry, said Woot when he wakened, for his knapsack of food had been left behind at the castle. Then let us travel on until we can find something for you to eat, returned the Scarecrow Bear. There is no use in your lugging my cage any farther, declared the canary. Let me out and throw the cage away. Then I can fly with you and find my own breakfast of seeds. Also, I can search for water and tell you where to find it. So the Green Monkey unfastened the door of the golden cage and the canary hopped out. At first she flew high in the air and made great circles overhead, but after a time she returned and perched beside them. At the east, in the direction we were following, announced the canary, there is a fine forest with a brook running through it. In the forest there may be fruits or nuts growing, or berry bushes at its edge. So let us go that way. They agreed to this and promptly set off, this time moving more deliberately. The Tin Owl, which had guided their way during the night, now found the sunshine very trying to his big eyes. So he shut them tight and perched upon the back of the little brown bear, which carried the owl's weight with ease. The canary sometimes perched upon the Green Monkey's shoulder and sometimes fluttered on ahead of the party, and in this manner they travelled in good spirits across that valley and into the next one to the east of it. This they found to be an immense hollow shaped like a saucer, and on its farther edge appeared the forest which Polychrome had seen from the sky. Come to think of it, said the Tin Owl, waking up and blinking comically at his friends, there's no objects now in our travelling to the Munchkin Country. My idea in going there was to marry Nimmie Amee, but however much the Munchkin girl may have loved a Tin Woodman, I cannot reasonably expect her to marry a Tin Owl. There is some truth in that, my friend, remarked the brown bear, and to think that I, who was considered so handsome, the handsomest scarecrow in the world, am now condemned to be a scrubby, no-account beast, whose only redeeming feature is that he is stuffed with straw. Consider my case, please, said Woot. The cruel giantess has made a monkey of a boy, and that is the most dreadful deed of all. Your colour is rather pretty, said the brown bear, eyeing Woot critically. I have never seen a pea-green monkey before, and it strikes me you are quite gorgeous. It isn't so bad to be a bird, asserted the canary, fluttering from one to another with a free and graceful motion, but I long to enjoy my own shape again. As Polychrome, you were the loveliest maiden I have ever seen, except, of course, Ozma, said the Tin Owl, so the giantess did well to transform you into the loveliest of all birds, if you were to be transformed at all. But tell me, since you are a fairy and have a fairy wisdom, do you think we shall be able to break these enchantments? Queer things happen in the land of Oz, replied the canary again, perching on the Green Monkey's shoulder and turning one bright eye thoughtfully toward her questioner. Mrs. Yup has declared that none of her transformations can ever be changed, even by herself, but I believe that if we could get to Glinda the Good, the sorceress, she might find a way to restore us to our natural shapes. Glinda, as you know, is the most powerful sorceress in the world, and there are few things she cannot do if she tries. In that case, said the little brown bear, let us return southward and try to get to Glinda's castle. It lies in the Quadling country, you know, so it is a good way from here. First, however, let us visit the forest and search for something to eat, pleaded Woot. So they continued on to the edge of the forest, which consisted of many tall and beautiful trees. They discovered no fruit trees at first, so the green monkey pushed on into the forest depths, and the others followed close behind him. They were travelling quietly along, under the shade of the trees, when suddenly an enormous jaguar leaped upon them from a limb, and with one blow of his paw, sent the little brown bear tumbling over and over, until he was stopped by a tree trunk. Instantly they all took alarm. The Tin Owl shrieked toot toot and flew straight up to the branch of the tall tree, although he could scarcely see where he was going. The Canary swiftly darted to a place beside the Owl, and the green monkey sprang up, caught a limb, and soon scrambled to a high perch of safety. The jaguar crouched low and with hungry eyes regarded the little brown bear, which slowly got upon its feet and asked reproachfully, "For goodness sake, beast, what were you trying to do?" "Trying to get my breakfast," answered the jaguar with a snarl, "and I believe I've succeeded. You ought to make a delicious meal, unless you happen to be old and tough." "I'm worse than that, considered as breakfast," said the bear, "for I'm only a skin stuffed with straw, and therefore not fit to eat." "Indeed?" cried the jaguar in a disappointed tone. "Then you must be a magic bear, or enchanted, and I must seek my breakfast from among your companions." With this, he raised his lean head to look up at the Tin Owl and the Canary and the monkey, and he lashed his tail upon the ground and growled as fiercely as any jaguar could. "My friends are enchanted also," said the little brown bear. "All of them?" asked the jaguar. "Yes, the owl is tin, so you couldn't possibly eat him. The canary is a fairy, Polychrome, the daughter of the rainbow, and you never could catch her because she can easily fly out of your reach." "There still remains the green monkey," remarked the jaguar hungrily. "He is neither made of tin, nor stuffed with straw, nor can he fly. I'm pretty good at climbing trees myself, so I think I'll capture the monkey and eat him for my breakfast." Woot the monkey, hearing this speech from his perch on the tree, became much frightened, for he knew the nature of jaguars and realized they could climb trees and leap from limb to limb with the agility of cats. So he at once began to scamper through the forest as fast as he could go, catching at a branch with his long monkey arms and swinging his green body through space to grasp another branch in a neighboring tree, and so on, while the jaguar followed him from below, his eyes fixed steadfastly on his prey. But presently Woot got his feet tangled in the lace apron, which he was still wearing, and that tripped him in his flight and made him fall to the ground, where the jaguar placed one huge paw upon him and said grimly, "I've got you now." The fact that the apron had tripped him made Woot remember its magic powers, and in his terror he cried out, "Open!" without stopping to consider how this command might save him. But at the word, the earth opened at the exact spot where he lay under the jaguar's paw, and his body sank downward, the earth closing over it again. The last thing Woot the monkey saw, as he glanced upward, was the jaguar perching into the hole in astonishment. "He's gone!" cried the beast, with a long-drawn sigh of disappointment. "He's gone, and now I shall have no breakfast." The clatter of the Tin Owl's wings sounded above him, and the little brown bear came trotting up and asked, "Where is the monkey? Have you eaten him so quickly?" "No, indeed," answered the jaguar. "He disappeared into the earth before I could take one bite of him." And now the canary perched upon a stump, a little way from the forest beast, and said, "I am glad our friend had escaped you, but as it is natural for a hungry beast to wish his breakfast, I will try to give you one." "Thank you," replied the jaguar. "You're rather small for a full meal, but it's kind of you to sacrifice yourself to my appetite." "Oh, I don't intend to be eaten, I assure you," said the canary, "but as I am a fairy, I know something of magic, and though I am now transformed into a bird shape, I am sure I can conjure up a breakfast that will satisfy you. If you can work magic, why don't you break the enchantment you are under and return to your proper form? Inquired the beast doubtingly. I haven't the power to do that, answered the canary, for Mrs. Yoop, the giantess who transformed me, used a peculiar form of yukuhu, magic that is unknown to me. However, she could not deprive me of my own fairy knowledge, so I will try to get you a breakfast. Do you think a magic breakfast would taste good, or relieve the pangs of hunger I now suffer? Asked the jaguar. I'm sure it would. What would you like to eat? Give me a couple of fat rabbits, said the beast. Rabbits? No, indeed. I'd not allow you to eat the dear little things, declared Polychrome the canary. Well, 3 or 4 squirrels then, pleaded the jaguar. Do you think me so cruel? Demanded the canary indignantly. The squirrels are my especial friends. How about a plump owl? Asked the beast. Not a tin one, you know, but a real meat owl. Neither beast nor bird shall have you, said Polychrome in a sensitive voice. Give me a fish then. There's a river a little way off, proposed the jaguar. No living thing shall be sacrificed to feed you, returned the canary. Then what in the world do you expect me to eat? Said the jaguar in a scornful tone. How would mush and milk do? Asked the canary. The jaguar snarled in derision and lashed his tail against the ground angrily. Give him some scrambled eggs on toast, Polly, suggested the bear Scarecrow. He ought to like that. I will, responded the canary, and fluttering her wings, she made a flight of 3 circles around the stump. Then she flew up to a tree, and the bear and the owl and the jaguar saw that upon the stump had appeared a great green leaf upon which was a large portion of scrambled eggs on toast, smoking hot. There, said the bear, eat your breakfast, friend jaguar, and be content. The jaguar crept closer to the stump and sniffed the fragrance of the scrambled eggs. They smelled so good that he tasted them, and they tasted so good that he ate the strange meal in a hurry, proving he had been really hungry. I prefer rabbits, he muttered, licking his chops, but I must admit, the magic breakfast has filled my stomach full and brought me comfort. So I'm much obliged for the kindness, little fairy, and I'll now leave you in peace. Saying this, he plunged into the thick underbrush and soon disappeared, although they could hear his great body crashing through the bushes until he was far distant. That was a good way to get rid of this savage beast, Polly, said the Tin Woodman to the canary, but I'm surprised that you didn't give our friend Woot a magic breakfast when you knew he was hungry. The reason for that, answered Polychrome, was that my friend was so intent on other things that I quite forgot my power to produce food by magic. But where is the monkey boy? Gone, said the Scarecrow bear solemnly. The earth has swallowed him up. Chapter 9. The Quarrelsome Dragons. The green monkey sank gently into the earth for a little way and then tumbled swiftly through space, landing on the rocky floor with a thump that astonished him. Then he sat up, found that no bones were broken, and gazed around him. He seemed to be in a big underground cave, which was dimly lighted by dozens of big, round discs that looked like moons. They were not moons, however, as Woot discovered when he had examined the place more carefully. They were eyes. The eyes were in the heads of enormous beasts whose bodies were trailed far behind them. Each beast was bigger than an elephant and 3 times as long, and there were a dozen or more of the creatures scattered here and there about the cavern. On their bodies were big scales as round as pie plates, which were beautifully tinted in shades of green, purple and orange. On the ends of their long tails were clusters of jewels. Around the great moon-like eyes were circles of diamonds which sparkled in the subdued light that glowed from the eyes. Woot saw that the creatures had wide mouths, and rows of terrible teeth, and, from tales he had heard of such beings, he knew he had fallen into a cavern inhabited by the great dragons that had been driven from the surface of the earth and were only allowed to come out once in 100 years to search for food. Of course, he had never seen dragons before, yet there was no mistaking them, for they were unlike any other living creatures. Woot sat upon the floor where he had fallen, staring around, and the owners of the big eyes returned his look, silently and motionless. Finally, one of the dragons which was farthest away from him asked, in a deep, grave voice, "What was that?" And the greatest dragon of all, who was just in front of the green monkey, answered in a still deeper voice, "It is some foolish animal from outside." "Is it good to eat?" inquired the smaller dragon beside the great one. "I'm hungry." "Hungry?" exclaimed all the dragons in a reproachful chorus. And then the great one said chidingly, "My son, you've no reason to be hungry at this time." "Why not?" asked the little dragon. "I haven't eaten anything in 11 years." "11 years is nothing," remarked another dragon, sleepily opening and closing his eyes. "I haven't feasted for 87 years, and I dare not get hungry for a dozen or so years to come." Children who eat between meals should be broken of the habit. "All I had 11 years ago was a rhinoceros, and that's not a full meal at all," grumbled the young one. "And before that I had waited 62 years to be fed, and it's no wonder I'm hungry." "How old are you now?" asked Woot, forgetting his own dangerous position in his interest in the conversation. "Why, how old am I, father?" asked the little dragon. "Goodness gracious, what a child to ask questions. Do you want to keep me thinking all the time? Don't you know that thinking is very bad for dragons?" returned the big one impatiently. "How old am I, father?" persisted the small dragon. "About 630, I believe. Ask your mother." "No, don't," said an old dragon in the background. "Haven't I enough worries? What with being wakened in the middle of a nap, without being obliged to keep track of my children's ages?" "You've been fast asleep for over 60 years, mother," said the child dragon. "How long a nap do you wish?" "I should have slept 40 years longer, and this strange little green beast should be punished for falling into our cavern and disturbing us." "I didn't know you were here, and I didn't know I was going to fall in," explained Woot. "Nevertheless, here you are," said the great dragon, "and you have carelessly wakened our entire tribe, so it stands to reason you must be punished." "In what way?" inquired the green monkey, trembling a little. "Give me time and I'll think of a way." "You're in no hurry, are you?" asked the great dragon. "No, indeed," cried Woot. "Take your time. I'd much rather you'd all go to sleep again and punish me when you wake up in 100 years or so." "Let me eat him," pleaded the littlest dragon. "He's too small," said the father. "To eat this one green monkey would only serve to make you hungry for more, and there are no more." "Quit this chatter and let me get to sleep," protested another dragon, yawning in a fearful manner, for when he opened his mouth, a sheet of flame leaped forth from it, and made Woot jump back to get out of its way. In his jump, he bumped against the nose of a dragon behind him, which opened its mouth to growl, and shot another sheet of flame at him. The flame was bright, but not very hot, yet Woot screamed with terror, and sprang forward with a great bound. This time he landed on the paw of the great chief dragon, who angrily raised his other front paw, and struck the green monkey a fierce blow. Woot went sailing through the air, and fell sprawling upon the rocky floor, far beyond the place where the dragon tribe was grouped. All the great beasts were now thoroughly wakened and aroused, and they blamed the monkey for disturbing their quiet. The littlest dragon darted after Woot, and the others turned their unwieldy bodies in his direction and followed, flashing from their eyes and mouths flames which lighted up the entire cavern. Woot almost gave himself up for lost at that moment, but he scrambled to his feet and dashed away to the farthest end of the cave. The dragons following more leisurely because they were too clumsy to move fast. Perhaps they thought there was no need of haste, as the monkey could not escape from the cave. But away up at the end of the place, the cavern floor was heaped with tumbled rocks, so Woot, with an agility born of fear, climbed from rock to rock until he found himself crouched against the cavern roof. There he waited, for he could go no farther, while on over the tumbled rocks slowly crept the dragons, the littlest one coming first because he was hungry as well as angry. The beasts had almost reached him when Woot, remembering his lace apron, now sadly torn and soiled, recovered his wits and shouted, "Open!" At the cry, a hole appeared in the roof of the cavern just over his head, and through it the sunlight streamed full upon the green monkey. The dragons paused, astonished at the magic and blinking at the sunlight, and this gave Woot time to climb through the opening. As soon as he reached the surface of the earth, the hole closed again, and the boy monkey realized, with a thrill of joy, that he had seen the last of the dangerous dragon family. He sat upon the ground, still panting hard from his exertions, when the bushes before him parted, and his former enemy, the jaguar, appeared. "Don't run," said the woodland beast, as Woot sprang up. "You are perfectly safe, so far as I'm concerned, for since you so mysteriously disappeared, I have had my breakfast. I am now on my way home to sleep for the rest of the day." "Oh, indeed," returned the green monkey, in a tone both sorry and startled. "Which of my friends did you manage to eat?" "None of them," returned the jaguar with a sly grin. "I had a dish of magic scrambled eggs on toast, and it wasn't a bad feast at all. There isn't room in me for even you, and I don't regret it because I judge, from your green colour, that you are not ripe and would make an indifferent meal. We jaguars have to be careful of our digestions. Farewell, friend monkey. Follow the path I made through the bushes, and you will find your friends." With this, the jaguar marched on his way, and Woot took his advice and followed the trail he had made until he came to the place where the little brown bear and the tin owl and the canary were conferring together and wondering what had become of their comrade, the green monkey. Chapter 10. Tommy Quickstep. "Our best plan," said the Scarecrow Bear, when the green monkey had related the story of his adventure with the dragons, "is to get out of this Gillikin country as soon as we can, and try to find our way to the castle of Glinda, the good sorceress. There are too many dangers lurking here to suit me, and Glinda may be able to restore us to our proper forms." "If we turn south now," the tin owl replied, "we might go straight into the Emerald City. That's a place I wish to avoid, for I'd hate to have my friends see me in this sad plight." And he blinked his eyes and fluttered his tin wings mournfully. "But I am certain we have passed beyond Emerald City," the canary assured him, sailing lightly around their heads. "So should we turn south from here, we would pass into the Munchkin country, and continuing south, we would reach the Quadling country where Glinda's castle is located." "Well, since you're sure of that, let's start right away," proposed the bear. "It's a long journey at best, and I'm getting tired of walking on 4 legs. "I thought you never tired being stuffed with straw," said Woot. "I mean that it annoys me to be obliged to go on all 4s when 2 legs are my proper walking equipment," replied the Scarecrow. "I consider it beneath my dignity. In other words, my remarkable brains can tire through humiliation, although my body cannot tire." "That is one of the penalties of having brains," remarked the tin owl with a sigh. "I have had no brains since I was a man of meat, and so I never worry. Nevertheless, I prefer my former manly form to this owl shape, and would be glad to break Mrs. Yupp's enchantment as soon as possible." I am so noisy just now that I disturb myself." And he fluttered his wings with a clatter and echoed throughout the forest. So, being all of one mind, they turned southward, travelling steadily on until the woods were left behind, and the landscape turned from purple tints to blue tints, which assured them they had entered the country of the Munchkins. "Now I feel myself more safe," said the Scarecrow Bear. "I know this country pretty well, having been made here by a Munchkin farmer and having wandered over these lovely blue lands many times. Seems to me, indeed, that I even remember that group of 3 tall trees ahead of us, and if I do, we are not far from the home of my friend Ginger." "Who is Ginger?" asked Woot, the green monkey. "Haven't you heard of Ginger?" exclaimed the Scarecrow in surprise. "No," said Woot. "Is Ginger a man, a woman, a beast, or a bird?" "Ginger is a girl," explained the Scarecrow Bear. "She's a fine girl too, although a bit restless and liable to get excited. Once, a long time ago, she raised an army of girls and called herself General Ginger. With her army she captured the Emerald City and drove me out of it because I insisted that an army in Oz was highly improper. But Ozma punished the rash girl, and afterward Ginger and I became fast friends. Now Ginger lives peacefully on the farm near here and raises fields of cream puffs, chocolate caramels and macaroons. They say she's a pretty good farmer, and in addition to that, she's an artist and paints pictures so perfect that one can scarcely tell them from nature. She often repaints my face for me when it gets worn or mussy, and the lovely expression I wore when the giantess transformed me was painted by Ginger only a month or so ago." "It was certainly a pleasant expression," agreed Woot. "Ginger can paint anything," continued the Scarecrow Bear with enthusiasm as they walked along together. "Once, when I came to her house, my straw was old and crumpled, so that my body sagged dreadfully. I needed new straw to replace the old, but Ginger had no straw on all her ranch, and I was really unable to travel farther until I had been restuffed. When I explained this to Ginger, the girl at once painted a straw stack, which was so natural that I went to it and secured enough straw to fill all my body. It was a good quality of straw too, and lasted me a long time." This seemed very wonderful to Woot, who knew that such a thing could never happen in any place but a fairy country like Oz. The Munchkin country was much nicer than the Gillikin country, and all the fields were separated by blue fences, with grassy lanes and paths of blue ground, and the land seemed well cultivated. They were on a little hill, looking down upon the favoured country, but had not quite reached the settled parts, when, on turning a bend in the path, they were halted by a form that barred their way. A more curious creature they had seldom seen, even in the land of Oz, where curious creatures abound. It had the head of a young man, evidently a Munchkin, with a pleasant face and hair neatly combed. But the body was very long, for it had 20 legs, 10 legs on each side, and this caused the body to stretch out and lie in a horizontal position, so that all the legs could touch the ground and stand firm. From the soldiers extended 2 small arms, at least they seemed small beside so many legs. This odd creature was dressed in the regulation clothing of the Munchkin people, a dark blue coat neatly fitting the long body, and each pair of legs having a pair of sky blue trousers with blue tinted stockings and blue leather shoes turned up at the pointed toes. "I wonder who you are," said Polychrome the canary, fluttering above the strange creature, who had probably been asleep on the path. "I sometimes wonder myself who I am," replied the many-legged young man, "but in reality I am Tommy Quickstep, and I live in a hollow tree that fell to the ground with age. I have polished the inside of it and made a door at each end, and that's a very comfortable residence for me because it just fits my shape." "How did you happen to have such a shape?" asked the Scarecrow Bear, sitting on his haunches and regarding Tommy Quickstep with a serious look. "Is the shape natural?" "No, it was wished on me," replied Tommy with a sigh. I used to be very active and loved to run errands for anyone who needed my services. That was how I got my name of Tommy Quickstep. I could run an errand more quickly than any other boy, and so I was very proud of myself. One day, however, I met an old lady who was a fairy, or a witch, or something of the sort, and she said if I would run an errand for her to carry some magic medicine to another old woman, she would grant me just one wish, whatever the wish happened to be. Of course, I consented, and taking the medicine, I hurried away. It was a long distance, mostly uphill, and my legs began to grow weary. Without thinking what I was doing, I said aloud, "Dear me, I wish I had 20 legs," and in an instant I became the unusual creature you see beside you. 20 legs! 20 on one man! You may count them if you doubt my word. "You've got 'em all right," said Woot the monkey, who had already counted them. After I had delivered the magic medicine to the old woman, I returned and tried to find the witch or fairy or whatever she was, who had given me the unlucky wish so she could take it away again. "I've been searching for her ever since, but never can I find her," continued poor Tommy Quickstep sadly. "I suppose," said the Tin Owl, blinking at him, "you can travel very fast with those 20 legs." "At first I was able to," was the reply, "but I travelled so much, searching for the fairy or witch or whatever she was, that I soon got corns on my toes. Now a corn on one toe is not so bad, but when you have 100 toes, as I have, and get corns on most of them, it is far from pleasant. Instead of running, I now painfully crawl, and although I try not to be discouraged, I do hope I shall find that witch or fairy, or whatever she was, before long." "I hope so too," said the Scarecrow. "But after all, you have the pleasure of knowing you are unusual, and therefore remarkable among the people of Oz. To be just like the other persons is small credit to one, while to be unlike others is a mark of distinction." "That sounds very pretty," returned Tommy Quickstep, "but if you had to put on 10 pairs of trousers every morning and tie up 20 shoes, you would prefer not to be so distinguished." "Was the witch or fairy or whatever she was an old person with wrinkled skin and half her teeth gone?" inquired the Tin Owl. "No," said Tommy Quickstep. "Then she wasn't old Mombi," remarked the transformed Emperor. "I'm not interested in who it wasn't, so much as I am in who it was," said the 20-legged young man, "and whatever or whomsoever she was, she has managed to keep out of my way." "If you found her, do you suppose she'd change you back into a 2-legged boy?" asked Woot. "Perhaps so, if I could run another errand for her and so earn another wish." "Would you really like to be as you were before?" asked Polychrome to Canary, perching upon the green monkey's shoulder to observe Tommy Quickstep more attentively. "I would indeed," was the earnest reply. "Then I will see what I can do for you," promised the Rainbow's daughter, and flying to the ground she took a small twig in her bill and with it made several mystic figures on each side of Tommy Quickstep. "Are you a witch or a fairy or something of the sort?" he asked as he watched her wonderingly. The Canary made no answer, for she was busy, but the Scarecrow Bear replied, "Yes, she is something of the sort, and a bird of a magician." The 20-legged boy's transformation happened so queerly that they were all surprised at its method. First, Tommy Quickstep's last 2 legs disappeared, then the next 2, and the next, and as each pair of legs vanished, his body shortened. All this while Polychrome was running around him and chirping mystical words, and when all the young man's legs had disappeared but 2, he noticed that the Canary was still busy and cried out in alarm, "Stop! Stop! Leave me 2 of my legs, or I shall be worse off than before." "I know," said the Canary. "I'm only removing with my magic the corns from your last 10 toes." "Thank you for being so thoughtful," he said gratefully, and now they noticed that Tommy Quickstep was quite a nice-looking young fellow. "What will you do now?" asked Woot the monkey. "First," he answered, I must deliver a note which I've carried in my pocket ever since the witch or fairy or whatever she was granted my foolish wish. And I am resolved never to speak again without taking time to think carefully on what I am going to say, for I realize that speech without thought is dangerous. And after I've delivered the note, I shall run the errands again for anyone who needs my services. So he thanked Polychrome again and started away in a different direction from their own, and that was the last they saw of Tommy Quickstep. Chapter 11. Ginger's Ranch. As they followed a path down the blue grass hillside, the first house that met the view of the travellers was joyously recognized by the Scarecrow Bear as the one inhabited by his friend Ginger, so they increased their speed and hurried toward it. On reaching the place, however, they found the house deserted. The front door stood open, but no one was inside. In the garden surrounding the house were neat rows of bushes bearing cream puffs and macaroons, some of which were still green but others ripe and ready to eat. Farther back were fields of caramels, and all the land seemed well cultivated and carefully tended. They looked through the fields for the girl farmer, but she was nowhere to be seen. "Well," finally remarked the little brown bear, "let us go into the house and make ourselves at home. That will be sure to please my friend Ginger, who happens to be away from home just now. When she returns, she will be greatly surprised." "Would she care if I ate some of those ripe cream puffs?" asked the green monkey. "No, indeed, Ginger is very generous. Help yourself to all you want," said the Scarecrow Bear. So Woot gathered a lot of the cream puffs that were golden yellow and filled with a sweet, creamy substance, and ate until his hunger was satisfied. Then he entered the house with his friends and sat in a rocking chair, just as he was accustomed to do when a boy. The canary perched herself upon the mantel and daintily plumed her feathers. The tin owl sat on the back of another chair. The scarecrow squatted on his hairy haunches in the middle of the room. "I believe I remember the girl Ginger," remarked the canary, in her sweet voice. "She cannot help us very much, except to direct us on her way to Glinda's castle, for she does not understand magic. But she's a good girl, honest and sensible, and I'll be glad to see her." "All our troubles," said the owl with a deep sigh, "arose from my foolish resolve to seek Nimmie Amee and make her empress of the Winkies, and while I wish to reproach no one, I must say that it was Woot the Wanderer who put the notion into my head." "Well, for my part, I'm glad he did it," responded the canary. "Your journey resulted in saving me from the giantess, and had you not travelled to the Yoop Valley, I would still be Mrs. Yoop's prisoner. It is much nicer to be free, even though I still bear the enchanted form of a canary bird." "Do you think we shall ever be able to get our proper forms back again?" asked the green monkey earnestly. Polychrome did not make reply at once to this important question, but after a period of thoughtfulness, she said, "I have been taught to believe that there is an antidote for every magic charm, yet Mrs. Yoop insists that no power can alter her transformations. I realize that my own fairy magic cannot do it, although I have thought that we sky fairies have more power than is accorded to earth fairies. The Yukahu magic is admitted to be very strange in its workings, and different from the magic usually practiced, but perhaps Glinda or Ozma may understand it better than I. In them lies our only hope. Unless they can help us, we must remain forever as we are." "A canary bird on a rainbow wouldn't be so bad," asserted the tin owl, winking and blinking with his round tin eyes. "So if you can manage to find your rainbow again, you need have little to worry about." "That's nonsense, friend Chopper," exclaimed Woot. "I know just how Polychrome feels. A beautiful girl is much superior to a little yellow bird, and a boy, such as I was, far better than a green monkey." Neither of us can be happy again unless we recover our rightful forms." "I feel the same way," announced the stuffed bear. "What do you suppose my friend the patchwork girl would think of me if she saw me wearing this beastly shape?" "She'd laugh till she cried," admitted the Tin Owl. "For my part, I'll have to give up the notion of marrying Nimmie Amee, but I'll try not to let that make me unhappy. If it's my duty, I'd like to do my duty, but if magic prevents my getting married, I'll flutter along all by myself and be just as contented." Their serious misfortunes made them all silent for a time, and as their thoughts were busy in dwelling upon the evils with which fate had burdened them, none noticed that Ginger had suddenly appeared in the doorway and was looking at them in astonishment. The next moment, her astonishment changed to anger, for there, in her best rocking chair, sat a green monkey. A great shiny owl perched upon another chair, and the brown bear squatted upon her parlour rug. Ginger did not notice the canary, but she caught up a broomstick and dashed into the room, shouting as she came, "Get out of here, you wild creatures! How dare you enter my house?" With a blow of her broom, she knocked the brown bear over, and the Tin Owl tried to fly out of her reach, and made a great clatter with his tin wings. The green monkey was so startled by the sudden attack that he sprang into the fireplace, where there was fortunately no fire, and tried to escape by climbing up the chimney. But he found the opening too small, and so was forced to drop down again. Then he crouched trembling in the fireplace, his pretty green hair all blackened with soot and covered with ashes. From this position, Woot watched to see what would happen next. "Stop, Ginger, stop!" cried the brown bear, when the broom again threatened him. "Don't you know me? I'm your friend, the Scarecrow. You're trying to deceive me, you naughty beast. I can see plainly that you are a bear, and a mighty poor specimen of a bear too," retorted the girl. "That's because I'm not properly stuffed," he assured her. "When Mrs. Yoop transformed me, she didn't realize I should have more stuffing." "Who is Mrs. Yoop?" inquired Ginger, pausing with the broom still upraised. "A giantess in the Gillikin country." "Oh, I begin to understand. And Mrs. Yoop transformed you? You are really the famous Scarecrow of Oz." "I was, Ginger. Just now, I'm, as you see me, a miserable little brown bear with a poor quality of stuffing. That Tin Owl is none other than our dear Tin Woodman, Nick Chopper, the Emperor of the Winkies, while this green monkey is a nice little boy we recently became acquainted with, Woot the Wanderer." "And I," said the canary, flying close to Ginger, "am Polychrome, the daughter of the rainbow, in the form of a bird." "Goodness me," cried Ginger, amazed. "That giantess must be a powerful sorceress, and as wicked as she is powerful." "She's a Yuko," said Polychrome. "Fortunately, we managed to escape from her castle, and we are now on our way to Glinda the Good to see if she possesses the power to restore us to our former shapes." "Then I must beg your pardons, all of you must forgive me," said Ginger, putting away the broom. "I took you to be a lot of wild, unmannerly animals, as was quite natural. You are very welcome to my home, and I'm sorry I haven't the power to help you out of your troubles. Please use my house and all that I have as if it were your own." At this declaration of peace, the bear got upon his feet, and the owl resumed his perch upon the chair, and the monkey crept out of the fireplace. Ginger looked at Woot critically and scowled. "For a green monkey," said she, "you're the blackest creature I ever saw, and you'll get my nice clean room all dirty with soot and ashes. Whatever possessed you to jump up the chimney?" I was scared," explained Woot, somewhat ashamed. "We need renovating, and that's what will happen to you, right away. Come with me," she commanded. "What are you going to do?" asked Woot. "Give you a good scrubbing," said Ginger. Now, neither boys nor monkeys relish being scrubbed, so Woot shrank away from the energetic girl, trembling fearfully. But Ginger grabbed him by his paw and dragged him out to the backyard, where, in spite of his whines and struggles, she plunged him into a tub of cold water and began to scrub him with a stiff brush and a cake of yellow soap. This was the hardest trial that Woot had endured since he became a monkey. But no protest had any influence with Ginger, who lathered and scrubbed him in a businesslike manner, and afterward dried him with a coarse towel. The bear and the owl gravely watched this operation and nodded approval when Woot's silky green fur shone clear and bright in the afternoon sun. The canary seemed much amused and laughed a silvery ripple of laughter as she said, "Very well done, my good Ginger. I admire your energy and judgment, but I had no idea a monkey could look so comical as this monkey did while he was being bathed." "I'm not a monkey," declared Woot resentfully. "I'm just a boy in a monkey's shape, that's all." "If you can explain to me the difference," said Ginger, "I'll agree not to wash you again. That is, unless you foolishly get into the fireplace. All persons are usually judged by the shapes in which they appear to the eyes of others. Look at me, Woot. What am I?" Woot looked at her. "You're as pretty a girl as I've ever seen," he replied. Ginger frowned. That is, she tried hard to frown. "Come out into the garden with me," she said, "and I'll give you some of the most delicious caramels you ever ate. They're a new variety that no one can grow but me, and they have a heliotrope flavor." Chapter 12. Ozma and Dorothy. In her magnificent palace in the Emerald City, the beautiful girl ruler of all the wonderful land of Oz sat in her dainty boudoir with her friend, Princess Dorothy, beside her. Ozma was studying a roll of manuscript which she had taken from the royal library, while Dorothy worked at her embroidery and at times stooped to pat a shaggy little black dog that lay at her feet. The little dog's name was Toto, and he was Dorothy's faithful companion. To judge Ozma of Oz by the standards of our world, you would think her very young, perhaps 14 or 15 years of age, yet for years she had ruled the land of Oz and had never seemed a bit older. Dorothy appeared much younger than Ozma. She had been a little girl when first she came to the land of Oz, and she was a little girl still, and would never seem to be a day older while she lived in this wonderful fairyland. Oz was not always a fairyland, I am told. Once it was much like other lands, except it was shut in by a dreadful desert of sandy wastes that lay all around it, thus preventing its people from all contact with the rest of the world. Seeing this isolation, the fairy band of Queen Lurline, passing over Oz while on a journey, enchanted the country and so made it a fairyland. And Queen Lurline left one of her fairies to rule this enchanted land of Oz, and then passed on and forgot all about it. From that moment no one in Oz ever died. Those who were old remained old. Those who were young and strong did not change as years passed them by. The children remained always children, and played and romped to their heart's content, while all the babies lived in their cradles and were tenderly cared for, and never grew up. So people in Oz stopped counting how old they were in years, for years made no difference in their appearance, and could not alter their station. They did not get sick, so there were no doctors among them. Accidents might happen to some, on rare occasions, it is true, and while no one could die naturally, as other people do, it was possible that one might be totally destroyed. Such incidents, however, were very unusual, and so seldom was there anything to worry over that the Oz people were as happy and contented as can be. Another strange thing about this fairyland of Oz was that whoever managed to enter it from the outside world came under the magic spell of the place and did not change in appearance as long as they lived there. So Dorothy, who now lived with Ozma, seemed just the same sweet little girl she had been when first she came to this delightful fairyland. Perhaps all parts of Oz might not be called truly delightful, but it was surely delightful in the neighborhood of the Emerald City, where Ozma reigned. Her loving influence was felt for many miles around, but there were places in the mountains of the Gillikin country and the forests of the Quadling country, and perhaps in faraway parts of the Munchkin and Winkie countries, where the inhabitants were somewhat rude and uncivilized and had not yet come under the spell of Ozma's wide and kindly rule. Also, when Oz first became a fairyland, it harbored several witches and magicians and sorcerers and necromancers, who were scattered in various parts, but most of these had been deprived of their magic powers, and Ozma had issued a royal edict forbidding anyone in her dominions to work magic, except Glinda the Good and the Wizard of Oz. Ozma herself, being a real fairy, knew a lot of magic, but she only used it to benefit her subjects. This little explanation will help you to understand better the story you are reading, but most of it is already known to those who are familiar with the Oz people, whose adventures they have followed in other Oz books. Ozma and Dorothy were fast friends and were much together. Everyone in Oz loved Dorothy almost as well as they did their lovely ruler, for the little Kansas girl's good fortune had not spoiled her or rendered her at all vain. She was just the same brave and true and adventurous child as before she lived in a royal palace and became the chum of the fairy Ozma. In the room in which the two sat, which was one of Ozma's private suites of apartments, hung the famous magic picture. This was the source of constant interest to little Dorothy. One had but to stand before it and wish to see what any person was doing, and at once a scene would flash upon the magic canvas which showed exactly where that person was, and like our own moving pictures would reproduce the actions of that person as long as you cared to watch them. So today, when Dorothy tired of her embroidery, she drew the curtains before the magic picture and wished to see what her friend Button-Bright was doing. Button-Bright, she saw, was playing ball with Ojo, the Munchkin boy, so Dorothy next wished to see what her Aunt Em was doing. The picture showed Aunt Em quietly engaged in darning socks for Uncle Henry, so Dorothy wished to see what her old friend, the Tin Woodman, was doing. The Tin Woodman was then just leaving his tin castle in the company of the Scarecrow and Woot the Wanderer. Dorothy had never seen this boy before, so he wondered who he was. Also, she was curious to know where the three were going, for she noticed Woot's knapsack and guessed they had started on a long journey. She asked Ozma about it, but Ozma did not know. That afternoon, Dorothy again saw the travellers in the magic picture, but they were merely tramping through the country, and Dorothy was not much interested in them. A couple of days later, however, the girl, being again with Ozma, wished to see her friends, the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman in the magic picture, and on this occasion found them in the great castle of Mrs. Yoop, the giantess, who was at the time about to transform them. Both Dorothy and Ozma now became greatly interested and watched the transformations with indignation and horror. "What a wicked giantess!" exclaimed Dorothy. "Yes," answered Ozma. "She must be punished for this cruelty to our friends, and to the poor boy who is with them." After this, they followed the adventure of the little brown bear and the tin owl and the green monkey with breathless interest, and were delighted when they escaped from Mrs. Yoop. They did not know then who the canary was, but realized it must be the transformation of some person of consequence, whom the giantess had also enchanted. When finally the day came when the adventurers headed south into the Munchkin country, Dorothy asked anxiously. Can't something be done for them, Ozma? Can't you change them back into their own shapes? They've suffered enough from these dreadful transformations, seems to me. I've been studying ways to help them ever since they were transformed, replied Ozma. Mrs. Yoop is now the only Yookahoo in my dominions, and the Yookahoo magic is very peculiar and hard for others to understand. Yet I am resolved to make the attempt to break these enchantments. I may not succeed, but I shall do the best I can. From the directions our friends are taking, I believe they are going to pass by Ginger's ranch, so if we start now, we may meet them there. Would you like to go with me, Dorothy? Of course, answered the little girl. I wouldn't miss it for anything. Then order the red wagon, said Ozma of Oz, and we will start at once. Dorothy ran to do as she was bid, while Ozma went to her magic room to make ready the things she believed she would need. In half an hour, the red wagon stood before the grand entrance of the palace, and before it was hitched the wooden sawhorse, which was Ozma's favourite steed. This sawhorse, while made of wood, was very much alive and could travel swiftly without tiring. To keep the ends of his wooden legs from wearing down short, Ozma had shod the sawhorse with plates of pure gold. His harness was studded with brilliant emeralds and other jewels, and so, while he himself was not at all handsome, his outfit made a splendid appearance. Since the sawhorse could understand her spoken words, Ozma used no reins to guide him. She merely told him where to go. When she came from the palace with Dorothy, they both climbed into the red wagon, and then the little dog Toto ran up and asked, Are you going to leave me behind, Dorothy? Dorothy looked at Ozma, who smiled in return and said, Toto may go with us if you wish him to. So Dorothy lifted the little dog into the wagon, for while he could run fast, he could not keep up with the speed of the wonderful sawhorse. Away they went, over the hills and through meadows, covering the ground with astonishing speed. It is not surprising, therefore, that the red wagon arrived before Ginger's house just as that energetic young lady had finished scrubbing the green monkey and was about to lead him to the caramel patch.